Hello everyone. Before the podcast begins, I just wanted to apologise that for unforeseen circumstances, the audio quality, specifically of myself throughout the podcast, is slightly louder than I normally like it to be. I didn't notice this during the process of recording, and it seemed like a waste given the fact that it's not too offensive during the bulk of the content, but I needed to apologise to you all from the outset that the audio quality, specifically in the intro segment, is quite abrasive. So hopefully you will be able to persevere with it, and it won't massively hinder your enjoyment of episode 51 of the Lookout Sir 40k podcast, which I'm going to hand over to right now. Hang on a second, I thought we were done with weekly podcasts. Well, the good people of Games Workshop had to come along and announce a 9th edition, everybody, and as a result, it would be rude of us not to try and capitalise on all the wonderful, traffic out there in the universe directed towards people wanting to have other people's opinions on the latest edition of Warhammer 40,000. So this is now episode 51 of the Lookout Sir 40k podcast, a Warhammer 40,000 podcast made, produced, developed, and now delivered to you, the fine people of the internet. And joining me in this intro segment, at least, is good old Phil. How's it going, Phil?
Oh, I'm very good, thank you.
Yeah, living the dream.
Well, very excited about the new edition of Warhammer.
Yeah,
cracking on with my Minotaurs as well, so they'll hopefully be partially ready for when the edition drops. That'll be good.
That'd be pretty incredible, my friend. That'd be pretty incredible. I mean, it has definitely been an exciting period of time since we, put out episode 50 of the Lookout Sir 40k podcast. We've transcended. We've moved beyond, the the amateur leagues, as it were, as we've entered into, 50 and beyond. We're serious about this, clearly.
We're so serious we got rid of Joe.
Well, we didn't so much get rid of Joe. I mean, for anyone who's concerned about that comment in the immediate instance, Joe is with us for the majority of the podcast, but because it took us about 4-something hours to record the segment that we hope you're going to enjoy, which is us talking about 9th edition, and we got to about 1 a.m., Joe was like, I'm not sticking around to record the intro. I just can't be bothered. So he didn't do that, and as a result, it's just me and Phil doing the intro. But in some respects, Phil, I feel like, we're better for this, aren't we? This is the best way to proceed when it comes to introductions. We do our best work without Joe here, wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah, rambles are kept to a minimum. I keep it all on track.
That's true. I mean, it's worth highlighting as well that we're also on another slight time restriction because Phil is about to go off and do a family quiz moments after this bit is recorded. So it's a real, smash and dash when it comes to an introduction segment. But
well, the main meat of the podcast is so big in itself, you don't really need a big intro.
Exactly. We're going to talk about 9th edition. That's the way this is going to go. So this is a podcast dedicated to our opinions on various things about 9th edition. We tried to keep away from speculating about rules and trying to talk about what we think might be good in 9th edition or what other kind of rules or things that they might actually be talking about at a later date. We were very conscious of the fact that that is obviously something a bit too nebulous at this particular moment in time, and ultimately we didn't really necessarily think that you guys wanted to hear another series of ill-informed opinions about what could be around the corner. So what we're essentially doing is we're talking about the reveal that took place. So we're talking about how we felt about the reveal, what happened during the reveal, and where Games Workshop have told us about rules. We talk about what we perceive the impact of that could be, although not getting too in-depth into the rules at this point in time. We definitely will do that in the future, but that will be done when we have rules to muck around with. And then, it's just general chatter about how we think, the announce went, how we think the models look, and how we perceive all of this to be received by you and us, the Warhammer 40,000 community. Sound about right, Phil?
It seems pretty spot on.
There you go. There you go. Having, sat through the recording, Phil knows better than most. But Phil, you'll never guess what, Phil?
What's that?
We've got another 5-star review.
Ooh.
I know. I mean, just because Joe's not here to do the thank yous, it doesn't mean that they're no less important. Although, hopefully, the guy who left this review wasn't hoping for Joe specifically to say thank you to him, because today you're going to be thanked by good old Phil. But let's kick it off by saying who he is, where they come from, and what they said. So the name of the individual was Juniper's Knot Was Great, which I suppose is an interesting title. I'm not entirely sure what the significance of that is. Maybe I should have looked up beforehand. Have you any sort of cultural familiarity with that turn of phrase, Phil? Juniper's Knot Was Not Great?
No, I'm not sure, to be honest.
Well, nonetheless, this is a fan of the Lookout Sir 40k podcast who heralds from the north of America.
Another one?
I know, the United States, no less. Not Canada, which obviously would also be within the continental Northern America. Or at least I think it is. Am I getting geography wrong? I don't think I am. Yes, of course. Anyway, I like the fact, Phil, that you're not willing to step in and help me because you're like, I actually don't know now.
Yeah, you had me confused.
Canada's in North America, Phil.
But both are North America, yeah.
Yes, but they are different countries.
Yes.
But they are within the continent of North America.
Of North America, yes.
Unless Canada is itself a continent. Now we're going to sound really stupid.
No, it's not.
It's just something you never really have to think about as a British person, isn't it?
I mean,
other than
when you do geography as a kid, but that's...
Yeah.
Long time ago.
So, I again, it's one of those situations where I said it with enough authority that I hoped I was right. But obviously for our North American listeners, apologies if I was factually inaccurate there. But nonetheless, this United States of America fan commented, amazing, 5 stars. The hive mind approves of this podcast and Joe to be used for biomass. Another... example of someone wanting to do bodily harm to Joe, which is always an approved, statement made by people. We love it when there's a bit of Joe abuse out there, don't we, Phil?
Oh, always.
So, to say thank you for your 5-star review, I'm going to hand over now to Phil.
Thank you, dear American, or Canadian. No, they're definitely American.
It's come from iTunes of the United States of America, so yes.
So we'd assume so, unless they're using their NordVPN to watch American Netflix and they're secretly from England.
Phil,
that would be too complicated.
Have you been doing another backhand deal with advertisers again?
I wish. No.
Indeed. You seem to keep slipping those in there.
It's a subtle way of advertising. If it was,
well, really absolutely
smooth way.
At the risk of getting into a tangent on this, the guy from Mathhammer actually got in contact with me to thank us for our not advertising of him.
Brilliant. Was he like, thanks very much for that plug that I didn't have to pay you for this time?
Exactly. He said he saw, quote, a small spike.
Oh.
There you go. That's what we represent in the world of advertising opportunities, everybody.
Yeah. For anyone that's interested.
Yeah, if you do want to experience what was, generously referred to as a small spike, get in touch. Anyway, sorry, Phil. You were in the middle of saying thank you.
Yeah. Dear new American friend, thank you very much for your sweet message. I applaud you, though, to go out there to your other American friends, knocking on their doors, staying socially distanced away from them and telling them more about our podcast so we can do a Beatles and break into the Americas. Thank you.
We'd likely make a good Beatles, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, we all know Joe's probably the Ringo of the team, don't we?
I don't know if that's entirely fair to call him a Ringo as such, I think, well, maybe, I don't know. Is it worse these days to be called a Paul McCartney?
I don't know, maybe.
Well, anyway, moving on from Beatles-related analogies. Thank you very much. Juniper's Knot was great. We appreciate all those people out there who leave us 5-star reviews. They make us feel warm and fuzzy inside, thus us taking the time to shout them out here in a quite obvious attempt to get more of you to do the same. So if you too want to be like Juniper's Not Was Great, then by all means leave a 5-star review, and you could very well hear your internet avatar / pseudonym shouted out over the internets. Ooh, can't do better than that. So yeah, that is us done with the intro segment. We're going to get on now with talking about 9th edition. So we hope you enjoy, and obviously look forward to more Lookout Sir 40k as the year progresses onwards and 9th edition marches forwards. Like and subscribe, reach out to us on social media, all that other stuff applies. Thank you very much, everybody. Transitional noise. Woo! Hello, everyone. In this part of the podcast, if it wasn't already immediately obvious from the intro segment, we're now going to talk about Warhammer 40,000 9th edition, because bar the fact that Imperial Knights have just had some rules revealed, and this weekend they're supposed to be putting out another Psychic Awakening. Which Psychic Awakening is it? Is it this weekend, everyone?
It's Engine War.
Is it Engine War this weekend, or have they started previewing that and then there's another one?
No, it's pre-order this Saturday.
Oh, yeah, that's what it is.
And then I imagine off the back of that, you'll get the next one, but almost immediately.
Yeah, yeah. The whistle stop. Oh, God. Darn you, coronavirus. Now let's get all these books out before 9th hits. So there you go. Depending on how the GW release schedule goes, enjoy using those Psychic Awakening books for a relatively short period of time. Oh, sick burn.
The shortest one will be Deathwatch, because they already announced that Deathwatch are getting rules almost immediately after. So.
Well, they didn't say that. They just said they're getting something.
No, they did. They did say it basically. Old, what's his face? What's his name again? The one with the glasses.
The one they kept on muting.
Yes, the muty one, Specky.
Before he dropped an obvious bomb that he wasn't supposed to. They're like, oh, quickly, silence him.
Actually, we should just start with that, right, Phil? Because, I mean, that's something of a sore spot for you during the Q&A segment that they did the other day. So, Specky, I can't remember his name. What's his name? I shouldn't
Pete Foley.
Pete Foley, thank you. I shouldn't keep calling him Specky. That suggests that I'm being rude to what is a wonderful human being.
You've literally met him before.
I have met him before, yes, absolutely.
Phil played against him, didn't he?
Phil did play against him, yeah.
And I beat him. He had GC Colts.
Yeah.
And socked him good.
Although, for anyone getting confused out there, they weren't playing Warhammer 40,000. Anyway, that got a bit weird. Anyway,
getting to death.
Yeah. But yeah, so Pete Foley, he was talking about the Death Corps of Krieg and the potential of their impending codex or a series of codexes for Forge World, and seemingly he was going to make a very poignant point about Death Corps of Krieg codex potential, having, shortly after that, having revealed the fact that Deathwatch were around the corner, and his microphone muted. I mean, Phil, how was that whole experience for you?
It was fine, if I'm honest.
Okay.
It would be nice to have heard what he said, because by the time he did unmute himself or whatever happened, the other guy was talking instead, so that he didn't actually get a chance to reiterate what he did say. But at least they confirmed that they're doing stuff for them to bring them in line with the other regiments, whatever that may mean. Who knows?
Indeed.
I would love it if they sort of gave a bit more clarification, but that Q&A is more sort of vague yes, vague no's, ums and ahs sort of answers. They're not giving you anything concrete, which is a bit of a shame, but that's what they tend to be.
Yeah, I mean, credit where credit's due to the media training of Games Workshop employees. They're very, very good at saying a lot while saying nothing. Like politicians, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But based on that, and just to kind of do a bit of housekeeping beforehand, Joe was telling me before we started recording this segment that he's done this conversation many, many times in the last 24 hours. So we're trying to mix it up and make it slightly different. I mean, at the end of the day, there's hundreds of people out there talking about the rules and what they think is going to happen and what they think might be good and leading to themselves to certain conclusions based on the limited information that we have. We're just going to talk about the reveal that took place on the weekend, so the first kind of big reveal, and we're going to talk about a general kind of sentiment towards this whole sequence of events and how we felt about it, how we perceived others have felt about it, and just speculate more about what we think the response is going to be to 9th edition and how it's going to, hopefully be received by what we believe to be 40K's largest fan base ever, but ultimately, freshest fan base ever. There was a certain security, I would like to say, with Warhammer of 5-6 years ago, where we hardcore, diehard fans who had, been with them through thick and thin, were even willing to put up with 6th and subsequently 7th edition. So we were quite battle-hardened, tolerating quite wibbly versions of the rules. So it's going to be very interesting to me to see how people who have been fed on a diet of 8th adapt to the new world order of things. But, unless anyone has any other particular points they want to raise before we get on with things, we're going to talk through the series of things that happened in the reveal, touch upon the Q&A elements, and then ultimately pull out a few other interesting points and generally ramble about 9th edition and what we know so far. Sound reasonable, gentlemen?
Sounds good to me.
Good.
Sounds all right.
There you go. There we go. And Joe will tell us at the end how different this conversation was to the 4 previous ones he's had around the facts. Or you can follow Joe's work in all the various places Joe appears, for those Joe fans out there. And obviously, if you're now a new Joe fan and you're experiencing this for the first time based on his current employment with Foreground/Vanguard, we apologise in advance that this won't be anything like that content. So, hope you enjoy. So, kicking things off, the good people of Warhammer 40,000 / Games Workshop began proceedings with a trailer. Joe.
Yes. They started with the trailer. I thought you were going to go more into it.
I was handing over to you to go more into it. You see, that was a seamless link there. That was like.
So they started off with 3 guardsmen behind a wall.
And what was significant about these guardsmen, Joe? Are you actually going to explain the entire trailer?
One of them was a lady.
Were they all ladies or just one of them?
They
was a
weren't
lady?
all ladies because 2 of them had masks on.
Ah, so ladies don't wear masks.
No, so one of them was like a normal Cadian, who was a lady, and then there was one who's got like the.
I was worried there for a second. You were going to say the normal Cadian was the man.
Yeah, then one was like in that hazmat stuff that Forge World sold.
Yeah, the hostile environment suit, I think it's called.
And I think one was like a Karsakin. And they get shot at by Necrons, and one gets shot in the face, and their whole body dissolves, and it's brilliant. It looks incredible. And then a Sister of Battle turns up, and she's
wearing a mask.
No, wearing a helmet.
Yeah.
It's all battle damaged, and she stands on a very convenient pile of skulls, which I have an issue with. Off straight away, right?
Right, hear it out.
Where did those skulls come from? Because as previously shown, 2 seconds before, being shot by a course weapon evaporates you.
Well,
it's the grim dark future. There's skulls everywhere. There's skulls on belt buckles. There's skulls on the statues, on the buildings.
So
it's the divine power, Joe, of the Emperor made manifest.
So what we're saying is someone was running along and got shot and dropped their belt buckle collection on the floor, and a Sister of Battle has come and stood on it.
No. What it is whenever a Sisters of Battle needs to rest her leg in an elevated situation, the Emperor of Mankind manifests skulls underneath her feet.
Oh, okay then.
So it's all tied to the holy magic of the God Emperor.
Yeah. Okay. And then she like really, really easily dispatches a bunch of Necro Warriors with their bolter, which is cool.
Yeah, exactly. She's clearly one of the sisters, founding chapter thingy-mabibs that they have that gets additional minus modifiers.
Well, no, she just had all the miracle dice.
Oh, that was true, yes. Are they miracle dice or fate dice?
Miracle dice.
They are miracle dice, okay.
And then she goes running for a bit, and she gets attacked by this new three-legged...
Sorry, Joe. I've just realised, because I thought maybe you were going to sort of Move on. You are literally going to explain this entire trailer.
Well, yeah, because it's all cool. And then the big slashy thing attacks her, and she's like, "Oh no!" and then runs away.
Yeah.
And she gets shot by a Necro Warrior that kind of appears out of nowhere.
Yeah.
But you don't see her get hit, but it's implied that she gets hit.
On account of the fact that she's burning.
And then when you see her again, she has in fact been hit. But she's dissolving a lot slower than a normal human being. And then she uses her faith to fix herself, which I quite like. The fact that they actually showed her healing herself.
She saw a stained glass window, didn't she, of the Emperor and went, "Oh," and all was well.
Mr. Hacky Slashy Triox three-legged dude comes in, all Rambo style, just swinging.
Don't those things have 4 legs, though?
3 legs, I think.
Oh, okay.
And then it cuts her. It goes to cut her head off, but she uses her power sword to tickle its leg, which doesn't really do anything. And then one of the new Primaris Assault Marines turns up and absolutely wrecks it. It is quite good.
They are. Man comes to the rescue.
They go outside, and then there's all the new stuff. All the new Primaris Marines turn up. The ones with the shield, the big board. There's the captain with a dead Space Marine skeleton attached to it.
Are you asserting that would be a Space Marine skeleton and not a human skeleton?
Well, cause when has he got time during the battle to staple a human skeleton to his shield?
So what you're saying is he ritualistically killed one of his brethren to put them on the shield beforehand?
Yeah, why not? We'll go with that.
Fair enough.
And then, and it's very clean shield as well. It doesn't look like it's used for shield purposes.
No.
Yeah.
It's a decorative shield.
Yeah, and then all the new Necron stuff turns up, and they have a little punch up.
Well, not all the new Necron stuff. I suppose all the Necron stuff that you'll get in the box set.
Yeah.
Although interestingly, it doesn't seem likely that you're going to get sisters in the box set, but they just got to be in the trailer.
We were like, oh, there's sisters in it. They're going to soup up the starter box set with a squad of sisters,
which would have been cool. Which would
have been ironic, given that they're now pushing you to not soup.
Well, are they pushing that or not? I mean, again, this is probably going off on an immediate tangent, but do you think that their changes to the way CPs work are drastically going to stop people from using...
It depends on how many CP, but I don't think it will slow people down in the slightest.
Yeah, it also depends as well, right? Because, I mean, we don't know how they're going to utilise CP with regards to, detachments in the general sense. Like, it might be that it costs you 1 CP to use what is nowadays referred to as a spearhead detachment. I don't know.
Yeah.
We just don't know yet, do we?
Yeah, anyways, it shows off all this, apart from the bikes, weirdly, they're not in the video. All the stuff that's in the starter box set makes its way into the video, although none of the Necron characters are in it either.
No,
there's a big guy at the end who's named character.
He is in
He's like the new Necron Lord or something.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe, though, as well. Maybe the bikes aren't actually in the starter box set, though, Joe.
That would be funny.
The sort of previews of the models, like the group shots, there's almost far too many models in there, especially on the Necron side.
You say that, but there's not.
Oh, here we go. Welcome to the Circus of Values.
The circus of values. So, the current Dark Imperium Space Marine box set has 10 Intercessors, 5 Hellblasters, 3 Inceptors, a Standard Bearer, 2 Lieutenants, and a Captain.
2 what?
2 Lieutenants.
2 what?
2 lefty-handy dudes.
Yeah, okay.
Lieutenants.
And a Captain. So that's 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. That's 22 models, right?
Did you have to use your fingers for that?
Their fingers were involved.
Yeah.
So, the new box set has 10 Assault Marines, which replace the 10 Intercessors. 3 bikes, which replace the 3 Inceptors. And then you've got the 3 Shield guys, who replace the Hellblasters, and then you've got the new characters that replace the characters. So it's the exact same number of people.
No. What about the
Necrons? You say? Aha!
No. What about those Melter guys?
Yeah, what about the Melter guys?
Well, they're included as well, Phil.
So this is added value.
Three more.
There's 3 Shield guys, 3 Melter
plus
guys,
the Chaplain,
and that Judicator,
plus the Lord Executioner. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's like 2 model difference.
I don't
if
think
that.
so.
But that's
So-
why it's going to be £100 box set.
And then, so from the Necron side, I can't remember everything, but the 20 Necron Warriors are basically replacing the 20 Poxwalkers that come in the current one.
You saying they're giving you 20 Necron Warriors?
20 Necron Warriors in
Blimey.
that box set. And then in Dark Imperium, you had the 7 Plague Marines, the Bloat Drone,
Blight drone.
Blight Drone, and then the 3 characters.
The Lord of Contagion.
So they're near model for model kind of comparison.
There you go. There you go.
Except you've swapped bikes for regular infantry.
Yeah.
Can I just go back to this trailer for a second? So, in terms of your general thoughts towards the trailer, though, Joe, what was your vibe on the trailer?
I really enjoyed it. I think it was really cool.
It was quite cool, wasn't it?
It wasn't Dawn of War 3 kind of quality, but it was all right.
Totally agree. Nowhere close to a Dawn of War 3. Sort of Dawn of War 2, I'd say.
Yeah. It was like a mix between Dawn of War 2 and the first Dawn of War.
Do you remember there was that really cool old Warhammer Fantasy trailer of Chaos Warriors in like misty woods?
For the gift, was it March of Chaos?
Yeah, it was March of Chaos. Now that was a trailer. My goodness. Good
That
old
is the
times, that one.
trailer. That's a trailer that was released something like 12 years ago that all other trailers should stand up next to.
Exactly.
They just don't.
Although the Warhammer Online trailer was also pretty lovely when they were catapulting goblins over...
Yeah.
Squigs or whatever it was.
Yeah, there was like a goblin that fed a squig like a mushroom, and the squig grew to this immense size, and then he jumped inside it to ride it into the building.
That was it, and he pulled on his giblets or whatever it was.
Yeah,
that was fantastic.
And right at the end, a Lord of Change turns up. Wasn't as good as that. Which it makes me a little bit upset because literally like a few days after they announced 9th edition, they announced that they're bigger than British Gas now.
Are they bigger than British Gas?
Yes.
I mean, based on what exactly?
Based on how much dollar they make.
They make more money than British Gas.
Yeah.
Although I suppose I'm happy in that reality because British Gas is an essential service and they shouldn't really be making that much money comparatively. I mean, they should make money, but not excessive amounts of money.
Yeah. Because the gas comes out of my body all day, every day.
Yeah, I know, but
I don't charge much money for that.
No one would want to put that on their hot stove. Phil, what was your feelings towards the trailer?
It was all right. It was pretty good. I think it would have been better if the Astartes Part 5 hadn't have dropped like a few weeks before, which was ultimately probably the best sort of 40k trailer you could ever get, and a much better representation of how sort of Space Marines look and move.
Yeah.
I think with this one, it was cool that literally everything in there is like a model. Like the majority of the scenery is real scenery. All the models in there, all the characters in there are actual models that are going to be released, which does make you speculate whether the female Cadian Guardsman is a tease for a new range of Guardsmen that are coming out,
100%.
or whether it's just a bit of diversity that they've added in there, and that's not going to be a model. But the fact is that literally everything else is a model. Makes me think maybe there will be something down the line.
Yeah.
I sort of think the way the Space Marines moved was a bit kind of cartoony in a kind of. That's the thing.
I mean, it was a cartoon, though, Phil.
I know, that's the thing. Astartes is a different sort of style.
Yeah.
And sort of is much better at portraying like motion and sort of the textures are so much more realistic.
Astartes is aimed at an older audience though. But I like the art style.
You're getting into market segmentation now, are you, Joe?
I am, yes.
Yeah, okay. So is this aimed towards the 12 to 16-year-old demo? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, this is aimed towards making Space Marines look cool to the younger generations, and they'll just be like, "Daddy, buy me that," or "Mummy, buy me this." And it also represents the new cool toys that they're releasing. Did you see that announcement?
Yes, the McFarlane toys. Yeah.
Yeah, they're releasing a Necron and an Assault Astartes or Assault Primaris Marine.
I will buy the first Space Marine action figure that makes sense of the knees. What is it with Space Marine action figures and their awful knees? I'm like, well, look, until you solve this problem, I'm out. I'm not interested. And I like the idea of having a toy Necron, except for the fact that people would look at it and go, that's a very odd Terminator you got there. And they'd be like, no, it's not the Terminator. It's a Necron. Like,
you're forgiven for thinking that.
Exactly. Obviously, I imagine our audience first went to, well, how would you confuse a Necron with a Terminator? Terminators are very different. It's like, no, the Arnold Schwarzenegger version, you see. I'm talking about a different intellectual property. My opinion on the trailer, for what it's worth, I thought the Space Marine was way too short, because a Primaris Marine is supposed to be bigger than a regular Marine, and he was only maybe a foot or two taller than, a Sisters of Battle, which...
maybe she was just very tall for a Sister of Battle.
I mean, given that she was very tall for a Sisters of Battle, maybe that was the situation. But I was always under the impression that a regular Space Marine in armour was 8 foot tall.
Yeah.
So yeah, but if she's 6 foot in power armour as well, she might be 6'5", 7 foot herself.
Yeah. Well, let's say 6'5", going on sort of averages there or whatever. Say 6'5" in a power armour, but a Primaris Marine is much bigger than a regular Space Marine. So, I mean, again, they've never clarified this, but surely a Primaris Marine should be like 10 foot tall.
Do you know what, though? I think if they did that, it would just look a bit silly. So the shot of the end where they're two next to each other, it's like the Space Marine's head would be cut off from the camera if you're focusing on her.
Indeed.
I think it's just like an aesthetic choice.
Yeah. I think so as well. I understand that they, and they did have him bigger, and... yeah, I just thought it was another little subtle hint towards the removal of old Marines. Sorry, Joe.
So when Belisarius Cawl made Primaris Marines, so do you reckon he took doors into account? He was like, we can't make these too big.
No, that's why he made a whole new range of vehicles, didn't he? Because he was like, well, you can't get through the old doors, so here's some new ones.
But like, in the real world, like he's like, he can't actually go into any buildings that we currently live in because he's too tall.
Yeah, but Belisarius Cawl is massive. He doesn't worry about... if he can get through the doors, he ain't worrying about other people, is he?
I think he just removes the door, though.
Is that how it works? He just lasers through?
Quite possibly. Although the weird thing is with the doors for the Primaris vehicles, is they're the same as the Land Raider and the Rhino, because the hatch sizes are the same and they're far too small.
But like that GIF that I sent you the other day, Phil, they just slide in like penguins.
Is that how they work?
Out on their bellies, yeah.
That is
just
all
grease themselves up and just slide out.
That is part of the Primaris design, the bit that GW didn't tell you about, that they can essentially squash themselves in like an accordion.
Yeah.
That's how they work. But yeah, no, I thought maybe the Marine was a bit too small, but that was a nitpick. And the other thing was, I kind of don't understand why they... CG trailers to me are like the domain of video games and like animated motion pictures and things of that nature. And don't get me wrong, it's cool they're doing it, and I'm not saying they can't do it, but it's always an interesting thing because you kind of think to yourself, I don't know if this helps or confuses people that come across it, because they might think, oh, there's a new Space Marine video game coming out, as opposed to, no, there's a new series of toy soldiers. I mean, again, the fact that they're putting it out there and it might get people to investigate is pretty cool. And it's clearly aimed at bringing in a newer audience as well, which I think is the right way to go. So, yeah, no, I mean, I did really enjoy it. I mean, again, I think the things I found quite jarring about it were the moments of atrocious, like, violence that just appeared randomly. Like that one guy who gets speared by the guy's, like, foot, and you're like, wow, that went from 0 to 100 real quick.
Well, that's just stop all the naysayers that might be saying Games Workshop's turning 40k into like a cuddly unicorn rainbow universe.
True.
Where there's no actual grimdark violence to it. So
no, that's true. Because I mean, it felt like, because again, in cartoons, I've got a point to this, Phil. Don't worry. In lots of shows, like Samurai Jack, for example, in Samurai Jack would kill like minions in the show, but they'd all turn out to be robots, so as it would satisfy the censors. So I figured that's why why they decided to use the Necrons, was that not just because of that, but it was handy that they used the Necrons, because obviously you can murder Necrons all day long and they're just robots, so no one cares. But
Yeah, but what about the guardsmen that literally get atomized at the start?
I don't know. I always felt like they didn't quite show enough of the atomization. It was sort of like they pulled away. But then I haven't watched the trailer over and over again, so maybe I'm forgetting things. Anyway, it was a cool thing to kick things off. There's a new trailer, and the trailer unveiled 9th edition. So in the preview, Eddie, Stu, that other fella. What was the other name of the fella that was hanging around on the live stream the whole time? The older guy.
No? Peachy?
Yeah, sure, whatever. Anyway, the point is they all get together and they go, "Ooh, look, everyone, 9th edition." So
is it Nick Payton? The really tall guy, Nick Payton.
I don't know who that is, so I'm just going to say yes. Anyway, so long story short is they've gone, "Look, everyone, 9th edition," and then they proceed to start talking about all the stuff that's going into 9th edition. Within the article on Warhammer Community, they immediately kick off by talking about the fact, hold on tight to your existing codexes, because obviously they're very keen to reinforce the fact that the 9th edition will work with all your existing books. Having gone so far, in fact, to releasing an article recently on Warhammer Community with a picture of a man holding on to his books. But I was already really, really interested in the statement that was in this. So, as mentioned in our handy Your Question Answered PDF, the rules for your Forge World units will receive new exciting updates shortly after the launch there. So the Forge World thing is super exciting. But yeah, if you want to continue to field your forces of the Inquisition as featured in November's White Dwarf, it's no problem. For now, is the broad statement of the thing. So, although obviously all these books will work from the get-go, they have already made it quite clear, although they haven't said as much, that systematically they're now going to basically get rid of all of the 8th edition books in favour of 9th edition.
In the Q&A, one of the guys said that going forward, when they release the new codexes, they will take the best bits from the codex and the best bits from Psychic Awakening books, and then those will then go together in the new codexes, which then will invalidate both books at the same time.
Yeah, and
well, they didn't specifically say that, because potentially Vigilus or Psychic Awakening, like the bits that are missing, will they still be valid? Like, potentially. But it's just all in one place as like a handy reference.
See, my assumption is, again, obviously, let's look at this from a historical perspective. The most notable change or sequence of events we can probably use as a fair point of comparison is 3rd edition to 4th edition, because that was the same set of criteria, essentially. So, for those of us who weren't around when 3rd edition launched, they had a document that came with it that was basically stat lines and rules for everything in the game as of 3rd edition. Now, obviously, in 3rd edition, everything that was in the game was a lot less than when 8th edition hit, where they had to break up everything across 5. It was 5, wasn't it? Yeah, 5 individual indexes. But back in 3rd edition, they were able to get it all into one index, and they also knew from the get-go that they didn't really need to massively worry about Space Marines or Dark Elder, because they were launching with the edition. But regardless of that, when we got to 3rd edition, the 3rd edition books were only themselves sort of single books, and obviously the release schedule was so much less aggressive in 3rd and 4th edition than it was in what we've seen in 8th. So what was happening is that, you know, in the case of the Dark Elder, they were stuck with their 3rd edition book all the way through 4th, and most of the way through 5th as well. But then, you know, the transgression or the changes felt quite natural, because, you know, the codex came in and it obviously replaced, much like how the new Space Marine codex that got released last year replaced the initial Space Marine codex that came out at the start of 8th. So that sort of followed the normal progression of things. What's interesting now, more than it's ever been before, is this is the first time where they've moved from one edition to the next, where they've not just got codexes, but they've got huge quantities of supplements and campaign books that have completely segregated rules. I mean, there's 9 or so Psychic Awakening books. There's 2 Vigilus books. There's a bunch of White Dwarfs. There's just so much supplementary material out there. So the communication or the complication this time is what do we think is going to happen when? I mean, we'll just use it as the most clear-cut example. What do you think is the most likely to happen when Codex Space Marines hits?
I reckon they will just take everything from Psychic Awakening and Vigilus, all the best stuff, turn it into a new book, and then invalidate those parts of the books. So like all that content is no longer available to use, and then the normal like Blood Angels, Dark Angels and stuff. Then they just have to wait for their stuff. But you'd have to release. But so for instance, you've got Dark Angels, Grey Knights, and Thousand Suns all in the same Psychic Awakening book, and you can't invalidate one section of it without messing up the rest. So they'd have to do all 3 books at the same time.
No, I don't think so. But it just updates the relevant section. So
because we're gonna end up with so much. There is gonna be some massive FAQ stuff being released when 9th edition comes around for every codex.
Well, we already know that 9th edition invalidates all the current FAQs. They've stated that, right? So all current FAQs are dead. Assuming, obviously, unless you're still playing 8th edition, which obviously you will be doing for a while longer, I'm sure. But yeah, as of 9th edition, all those FAQs are gone, and they're replaced with new FAQs. I suppose my point about the Space Marine thing is that the thing that's really interesting with Space Marines, I suppose, is Space Marines currently, as a rule set, is split out over 1, 2, 5, 6... 7, 8, 9 Space Marine books. So they've got so there are Space Marine rules in I think 3 different Psychic Awakening books. So the Black Templar rules are in Faith and Fury, and then there are specific rules for characters. Oh no, they're in the Black Templar book as well, aren't they? In Faith and Fury.
Yeah.
But
and you've also got in Faith and Fury. You've also got the different levels of apothecary, standard bearer, chaplain, and all that. I imagine those will get rolled into the new codex as well.
Oh, 100%.
Sure.
Yeah, but I imagine they'll keep the supplements going because the supplements literally just have special characters.
Do you think so though? Because my concern with the supplements is, in a lot of instances, especially in the case of the Iron Hands, right? That supplement's been FAQ'd to death. It's almost like you kind of... I don't know. I mean, if I was going to call a mulligan on anything, I think I'd call a mulligan on all those supplements, because I think... I don't know. The problem is with the Space Marine book they put out last year is it has been FAQ'd into oblivion. And it's evident that they're going to put out a new Space Marine book. So are they going to go whole hog and put out new supplements to go with the new Space Marine book, or are they going to try and wing it and say, oh yeah, you can still use the old supplements? My fear is it's going to be the first thing. I think they're just going to get rid of everything and say, there's our new Space Marine book, take it or leave it.
What I'd like to see, and this is going to sound crazy,
all right, here it is.
I'd like to see like a 3-book box set, as it were.
Oh,
like the 7th edition rule book, where you'd have 1 book which is the chapters, so that would be all your supplements rolled into 1 book.
Oh,
right. Then you had 1 book which is all Primaris units, and then the other book is all your old Marines.
See, yeah, I mentioned that to Dan yesterday, and he was having none of it.
Controversial. Well, no, Phil, let's be clear. Phil didn't mention it coming in a 3-book set.
No.
Phil just said
they might separate out what's now, I think, Firstborn, which is the old style Space Marines, and new Primaris, because there's enough new units to...
But aren't the Primaris Firstborn?
No.
So, are you talking about the Justicar or Judicator thing that was leaked today?
No.
So I discovered today that that's a fake because they've written its name wrong.
Well, yeah, of course.
Well, it was obviously a fake. I don't even know what we're talking about.
Right. The term firstborn refers to the old style Space Marines. It's like a term that they've used like in the lore, in the books.
Because I always thought though, because the Primaris Marines are mostly made up of Marines that were taken away during the Horus Heresy, they should be the firstborn.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah, but anyway, that's getting into a finessing thing. I mean, it's pretty clear that the intent would be to come up with a nicer name for old Marines than old Marines, right?
Well, exactly. So that's why they're called firstborn. But whether that gets adopted as like a thing or a rule or a keyword, I doubt it. But who knows? But there's enough like new Primaris units that could be a codex in its own right, and there's enough old models to be a codex in its own right. And if you're someone that is just collecting new Primaris, do you want to lug around one big book that's got both in, or do you want two small books and you could take one or you can take both?
Well, to your point, Phil, I think, as we were discussing yesterday, I think it's a very dangerous play for Games Workshop to go, here's Codex Primaris Marines and here's regular Codex Marines, because I think that will validate people who have still got grumbles about the fact that their old Marines are being phased out by Primaris Marines. I mean, at this point, I don't understand why anyone is worried about that or still preoccupying themselves with that mindset. It's obviously what's happening, and the Primaris Marine...
Very slowly, though.
Very slowly, but the Primaris Marine models are so much better.
Oh, exactly. So why would you kind of care, really?
Yeah, exactly. And again, I mean, look, let's not go around the houses on this again, but I think it's indicative of the problem that we outlined from the outset with the Primaris stuff, which was they should have always just been bigger Marines in new suits of armor as opposed to a new type of Marine, but we'll leave that without getting into it. I think the thing that was really interesting to me, and I'd love to hear your opinion of it, what do you think? So let's divorce ourselves from our current situation, right? We're all long-term fans. We've been with this game for years and years and years in various guises. We're those hardcore fans that have gone through some of the more, trying editions of this rule set. I'm a new 40k player, or I'm someone who hasn't played 40k for 15 years. I had a little bit of affinity with it when I was a kid, but I got back into it because 8th edition was really cool and I wanted to jump on board. I bought a Space Marine army. I started out early 8th edition. I got my first Space Marine book, and then I got told by Games Workshop, here's a new Space Marine book. And I was a bit like, yeah, it's a bit of a pain, but then, wow, look how powerful these guys are. And, supplements, that's super interesting. Now, within a year, I'm potentially going to be told again, hey guys, here's a new series of Space Marine books and supplements. Have fun. How do I feel?
It depends what they do. I think they might do a little bit what they did with the Chaos 2.0 Codex, where they give you two options. It's like you can use your old Codex, but if you want the new units, you're going to have to, buy a box set, and the rules will be in there. And there's some other bits in there, like there's the Crusade rules, for example. They've said they're going to be in all the new codexes, so you won't have any of those bits. So you can sort of use your old codex and muddle along with some FAQs and some other pamphlets from elsewhere. Or if you just want to be nice and neat, you can just buy the new codex where it will all be there in one place. So if you're super annoyed or can't afford it, you can kind of use your old one to an extent. It depends on really how much they're going to change the units, like if they're going to balance different rules. So for example, like Hellblasters, they're widely seen as not very good. If they're going to change, if they're going to do what they did for the plasma rifles that they did with the bolt rifle, and make the assault and heavy ones completely different to sort of make them better, and all the data sheets are effectively most are the same, but there's like 5 or 6 that are completely different from the other ones, then you kind of go, well, this is a completely invalidated codex. I bought my Spaceman Codex around Christmas time, I think it was. So say 6 months, something like that.
Yep.
And it's like to be told I've got to buy a new one, or given the option to buy a new one, in a month or two time would be a bit annoying. I probably would still do it because I probably want the new models. Another option is that and I know you probably disagree with me, is the Space Marine Codex won't come out first. It'll be one that will come out Christmas time or later. So you would have had that, at least that Codex, for a good year before you have to buy a new one, which is what we did, if you got the very first 8th edition Space Marine Codex. So maybe it wouldn't be that big of a problem then.
Yeah.
Joe, what's your thoughts?
First of all, GW is actually saying anyone that's bought a codex or rule book in the last 3 months can actually get their money back.
Ooh.
They're actually giving refunds, and you don't have to give the books back either.
Where have they published that information?
I can't remember if it was on Warhammer Community or just on a Facebook post.
Oh, really?
But they've actually announced that as a thing.
Okay.
I don't mind, and I don't understand why people do complain about it, because if anyone's ever played Magic the Gathering or any trading card game, if you play this, like Magic the Gathering Standard has your yearly block of cards, and then you have 3 expansions worth of stuff, sets, and then when a new one is released, the furthest one back of the 4 gets pushed out, and you can't use those cards anymore. So you just have to buy a whole new load of cards, and these cards will become popular. And the same for like other trading card games. If anyone remembers the great fiasco of Star Wars X-Wing, when 2nd edition came out, they just announced that all rules, all cards, all ship cards, all templates, everything for Star Wars X-Wing is now invalid, and you have to buy everything all over again. We're going to sell new card sets, but you only get 1 card for each plane or each fighter in your army. And if you've got 6 to 8 X-Wings, you have to buy this box set 6 to 8 times, kind of thing.
Yeah, so many people were annoyed by that, though.
Oh yeah, so many.
Yeah, they were hugely annoyed. And I mean, and to your point though on the Magic the Gathering stuff, and again, this probably is getting a little bit too much into devil's advocate, right? I mean, if you're playing Magic the Gathering and your deck rotates out of standards, you still get use out of those cards. You could play Modern, or you could play Commander, or you could. There's other formats within Magic the Gathering. Obviously, you're not going to start playing Legacy because that's quite a different thing altogether. But the point is I think my thinking is with all of this is obviously Games Workshop have historically with this process with the Marine stuff treaded quite carefully. I just think in the case of the Marines in this instance, I think the Marine rule set as it was in 8th edition ended up being really messy. And my estimate of like 9 books was probably very high before, but to run a Space Marine army, you needed quite a lot of books, right? You needed your supplement, your core codex, probably a Forge Worlds book, index. Thank you. You needed Vigilus, or at least one Vigilus book. It had gotten quite messy, and obviously, and then in conjunction with that Space Marine book that they put out less than a year ago is one of the most FAQ'd books in 40k history, right? It is an absolute mess at the moment, how many different things you need to plug into it to make it work.
By that logic, then, people would love a new codex because it fixes all of the FAQs, gets rid of them, tidies it up.
It does, but at the same time, you create a situation where my concern is again, and I look at this from the perspective of new customers, again, you and I knew that 9th edition was always going to come around the corner, right? And we always made purchasing decisions and hobby-based decisions knowing that this stuff is always inevitably going to change. We've seen the pattern that was occurring with Age of Sigmar, and we knew what happened between 6th and 7th, and to a lesser extent between older editions and stuff. We're used to these updates and what they entail. My thinking is that, GW has done a great job of bringing in new fans. Is this going to be a bridge too far for those guys at this point? Are they going to risk losing customers who are just like, this is getting ridiculous. I can't be expected to shell out I can't be expected to shell out for a new series of books. And also as well, unlike Magic the Gathering, to Joe's point, there's no value to these books once they rotate out, right? I mean, admittedly, there's no value to some Magic the Gathering cards when they rotate out as well, but there definitely isn't a value to an old Space Marine Codex. I mean, if I tried to sell my old initial 8th edition Space Marine Codex, I haven't because I like to keep them because I'm weird, but if I ever tried to sell it, I mean, Joe, you used to be in the business of selling old stuff on the internet. What could you get for an old Space Marine Codex?
£2-3.
I mean,
you're doing that wrong. I sold a bunch of anywhere between 5th and 7th edition codexes for between 5 and 15 quid.
Well,
yeah, but that's an old enough edition to be nostalgic and to be people playing on.
Okay,
and your stuff you put on at a fixed price and you just left it.
That is true as well. You definitely did do that.
Whereas, like, people who actually, like, say they want the money fast, whatever, or they're just like, I want it gone out of my house, they'll just take whatever people offer them. And normally it's not much.
Anyway, rather than getting into that semantics, I think it's just interesting, right? And I think it's one of the interesting elements to the health of the game, because I felt like there were a lot of people who had their trepidations around the last Space Marine Codex. There were definitely even more people who had their trepidations around the Chaos Space Marine Codex, and the fact that the Chaos Space Marine Codex, came before the Space Marine Codex, and that the Chaos Space Marines were losing out on XYZ thing. And this is the thing, right? I'm not suggesting that it's going to have a massive impact on things, but it has an impact, right? And it has an impact on the discourse, because here's the thing, right? Of what we know that there's going to be a lot of new Primaris stuff coming down the pipeline. We know there's bikes. We've seen badly rendered shots of tanks and land speeders that have been doing the rounds, so we know that they're in the pipeline. And we know all the stuff that they revealed there. There's a lot of new Space Marine units coming down the pipeline, so they're gonna have to put out a new codex. And GW is not going to wait more than a couple months after the release of Ninth to put out a Space Marine codex, because it's just not within their. It's not in the best interest of the game. It's just, the thing is what is the reception going to be to that, and how do they manage it? Will they just take their book and say, right, cool, we've taken the best bits of this, best bits of that, best bits of this, and we've turned it into one thing, and that's that? Are we actually going to kind of continue some of the life support mentality? So, yes, you get a new Space Marine book. This just replaces the core Space Marine book, and then all the old supplements, all the old FAQs, not the old FAQs, our new FAQs, all the old Vigilus stuff, that all gets sort of patched in like it did before. It just, I don't know, man. It just starts to feel. There's no ideal solution. I'm just really interested to find out what people think.
Yeah.
I think GW's best option at the moment for Marines is just to, as bad as it sounds, just Legends all the old Marines.
Wow, that is a left field scenario.
Because, right, prime example is when Fantasy became Age of Sigmar, right? GW murdered, like awful, chainsaw massacred so many armies in that. So when they just completely wiped out Bretonnians, completely wiped out
Tomb Kings,
the Tomb Kings guys, I think, and they kind of loitered around as like, here's some bits where you can play them if you want to, but
you win this fight if you've got a mustache.
Yeah, like they did it, and yes, people complained and moaned on the internet, but you know what happened? People got over it and moved on and just collected the new stuff. And GW still, by having it in Legends, you could still use your old Marines in open play and like the story one, was it Crusade? You'll still be able to do all of that. They'll probably still support it, but they'll just give you a separate book or just an
That's it.
online profile?
There's probably an awful lot of a bigger player base for Space Marines than either Tomb Kings and Bretonnian, and they probably got rid of those two just because they don't sell.
Yeah, but
There's a bigger player base. There is a bigger player base for Space Marines than there is all of Age of Sigmar. Like, it's a completely...
That's
but
why they won't do it. And they've
if any of those Space Marine players started playing in the last 3 years, since 8th edition started playing,
Which a lot of them will have.
right? Most of them would have just got Dark Imperium. Most people that have started have already got Primaris stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, but there's a difference between like 2,000, let's say just like between 1,000 to 2,000 points of Primaris Marines versus there maybe 10,000 points of Space Marines that they've been collecting for 10, 15 years.
I think the thing that's interesting, right, is that is the crux of every single edition of Warhammer 40,000 that there's ever been has always had a Space Marine book come out within the same year. It has always happened. You know, 5th edition had the Marine book launch at Games Day shortly thereafter. 6th edition, the Marine book practically came out with it, or shortly thereafter. Although actually, was it randomly Dark Angels first?
Dark Angels was the first. Dark Angels was like the practice, wasn't it?
Yeah, and then all of a sudden, so that was true, wasn't it? Yeah, it was a Dark Angel book, then it was Space Marines, but it all happened in a really rapid timeline. And I just think it's that thing, right? It's like Space Marines are the money makers. Space Marines is something they're gonna probably want to get out at Christmas. I don't know. You can't talk about a new edition of 40k without talking about the significance of a Space Marine release, and I just find it interesting. But anyway, look, let's move this thing along, because I worry that we're going to linger too long on this. It's obviously a very interesting topic, and hopefully you guys found that entertaining and interesting and got you thinking about things. How will you feel when you're told that your Space Marine book and the supplement you bought is now invalid and you have to buy a new one a year after having already done so? Let us know. On the topic of Space Marines, though, in addition to other fun stuff, and a thing that made Phil curse the gods, is chainsword-wielding intercessors. So Assault Intercessors, Phil, how did you feel that you had committed to the Minotaurs when you really wanted to do Black Templars?
Well, actually, I'm pleased about the Assault Intercessors, because I want them for my Minotaurs. However, it was the following day, after loads of miniatures had been leaked out on the internet, that they decided to then show off what everyone really wants to see, which is a whole bunch of new models. And they showed you the kind of Crusader sort of style models with the, like Joe said, the skeleton on the Storm Shield, I guess, and the Storm Shield guys with power swords. Like, those guys are quintessential Black Templars. And that was one of the reasons why I didn't want to collect them, because I was like, they don't have close combat units yet, they don't have kind of cool gothic looking knights, and it's like, now they do, and it is a bit like, but actually I'm quite happy with my Minotaurs. I think I was looking at some of those going, I can convert those the Storm Shield guys up. I just need to give them some round shields and maybe swap out the swords for some spears, and they look suitably Minotaur-y.
God, yeah, your chapter master as one of those sword and shield guys is actually a very good call, right?
Yeah, so I think those guys will fit in quite nicely. It does make me go, well, I could just keep a couple of them and paint them up black and do a miniature Black Templars at some point. It's like if these had come out like 6 months ago, I'd have been like Black Templars 100%. But in a way, I'm kind of glad that I haven't gone down that route.
They are the journey that you've been on. What's your opinion on these Assault Intercessors, Joe?
I think they're amazing. I've actually hilariously already made some before they'd shown them off, because I was going to make a unit.
Are you doing a Hellstorm War Games troll here, Joe?
Well, because I was like, I want to make a 10-man unit of guys to represent veteran intercessors. And how do you represent them having +1 attack? You give them chainswords.
Yeah, you go.
And now, here we go. So I'm already 5 models deep on it.
Although, haven't they got bolt rifles as opposed to mega bolt pistols?
Only one of them has a bolt rifle. The rest of them all have bolt pistols.
So you can't really run them as your veteran intercessors though now, because chainswords are going to have different stats.
Yeah, because they're going to have because they've got Astartes chainswords, as what Games Workshop have said. But I'm really looking forward to it. I think they're going to be really good. Obviously, I'm doing White Scars, so having those units in my army is actually quite good fun because I can just advance and charge them about everywhere.
Indeed. Assuming you can still do that, which I assume you will do, because obviously there seems to be a very heavy emphasis on people getting into combat now, doesn't there?
Yeah. So,
I think the thing that's interesting with the Assault Intercessors, if I can say so, is the fact that they've elected to release Assault Intercessors but not give them any additional mobility. Because obviously, historically, the Assault Marines not only had the assault weapons, but they also had the added mobility of a jump pack. And obviously, I understand why they haven't done that, because it's an Assault Intercessor, not an Assault, Marine or whatever variant they can come up with later. But it is interesting to have such a punchy, fighty force for the Marines that isn't going to be that mobile. Obviously,
you got your impulsors.
you can still you'd have to put them in a repulsor because you can't charge when you leave an impulsor.
Yeah.
You'd have to, but if you look at is it 6th edition Space Marine Assault Marines?
Yep.
So you'd buy them without jump packs.
Yep.
You pay the price of them with jump packs, but then you could replace those jump packs with either a Rhino or a drop pod for free.
Yep.
So I imagine we're gonna see you can either buy them as they are, now, and then you can put them in a repulsor or an impulsor, and later on down the line we're gonna get a box set where they have a jump packs in them.
Well, they've got to have a multi-pose or multi-variant option, because these are just the easy build kits, which will just have the chainswords, and there should be a different variant, whether it's different weapon options like power swords. I think power swords and storm shields will be an option, because we've seen that in some artwork from a year ago.
I think they're going to go with big chainswords that are two-handed, and then
like eviscerators.
Yeah, eviscerator chainswords, and then double chainsword.
Ooh.
Which is doable, because I've seen some of the old concept artwork for, I think it was Black Templars by, I can't remember his name, but his initials were MG. So he's like an old Games Workshop artist, and he, on his Instagram a few days ago, released a load of his old concept artwork, and one of them was basically two chainswords sort of glued back to back, with a weird gap in between. So who knows?
Style.
No. Sort of. So one facing forwards, one facing backwards, and a weird sort of gap in it. So almost like a weird double-headed axe. But it's chainsword. Yeah. I think the other option in terms of getting them into close combat, though, is they've talked about strategic reserve, which is
of course,
a new variant of deep striking. And it sounds like basically they said there's more generic stratagems. One of them is you can put units in reserve. And when I listened back to it, it sounds like the longer the turns go on, the better you can place them. So it might be from turn 1 or 2 you can come on from a table edge, but maybe from turn 3 or 4 it's like you can come up next to a building or further into the board from the board edge. So that'd be really interesting. So that will probably be how you'll use those Assault Marines.
I mean, let's be honest with ourselves, right? The minute that they release the rules for these being Death Watch, Death Company, it's all going to start getting very real very quickly, isn't it? These guys as Death Company is going to start to get a bit mental, as is also... Because one of the things that's interesting, and why I hope in some respects they do actually look at updating some of the supplements and stratagems and other things, because I never really gave a verdict on whether I was in favour or not in favour of the whole them redoing the Space Marine Codex. I mean, for me, because I'm such a hardcore fan who's going to support it and buy it anyway, I'm probably just going to buy whatever they throw at me because I'm that kind of lunatic. But I think for most people it's probably not going to be great. But it would be good if all of a sudden we started to get stratagems that massively benefited these guys, for example, because like the Black Templars have stratagems for Land Raider Crusaders, so you can advance and charge out of a Land Raider Crusader without suffering Overwatch, for example, with Black Templars. So if they were to implement a advance and charge out of a repulsor and not be overwatched for these guys, for say the Templars, well, all of a sudden that would be actually really, really cool and really interesting, and something that could definitely add some viability. I think that's the thing. The synergies between these guys and the Repulsor is going to be very noticeable. But additionally, it's going to be interesting to see what the relationship is between these guys and those new reserve roles. The other thing that's going to be super interesting is seeing how they stack up against Reavers. I mean, what's going to happen to the Reavers now that these guys are around?
Well, Reavers are just going to have to get good real quick, aren't they? They're like, oh boy. But then Reavers, like Games Workshop said that leadership's going to become more important, and Reavers actually have that kind of leadership debuff. But they also have those smoke grenades, which means they can't be overwatched as well.
Yeah, but they can't ever use them the turn in which they deep strike down. So if they're on foot, then it's less of a problem.
Yeah, but they can still infiltrate though, can't they, Reavers?
Yeah, but even infiltrate. No, they can't infiltrate.
Well, they can deep strike of some form.
Yeah, they can deploy within 9 inches. Phil, we have to give up on deep strike now. It's been 3 years since that's been a thing.
Tactical reserve now. They've given it a proper name.
Oh, have they renamed?
Or strategic reserve, tactical reserve, one of the two.
Can I just throw out a mad suggestion actually that I wanted to throw out where we were talking about storm shields? What do you reckon? Do you think that when they release the new rulebook with all the new points and weapon profiles, storm shields will become 4-up invuns?
Or combat shields 5-up invuns?
Yeah, well, combat shields 5-up invun, storm shield 4-up invun. Because I think the 3-up invun on a storm shield is a massive problem for the game.
Yeah.
What? Because it's too good.
It's too good.
Too many low invun. What's an Iron Halo say? 5-up.
4-up.
Why would you give? Because they've clearly got both on, unless it's a classic. It's just a visual thing.
Yeah,
it's
a decorative halo, not an Iron Halo. Well, the Iron Halo is a very rare artifact that's like a super powerful force field, whereas the Storm Shield is equally a super powerful force field. So they're kind of like the same thing. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there because I think a lot of the problems with some of the more silly aspects of invun saves could be solved if they universally agree that no one's invun except for ultra rare characters can be 3+.
Do you know what? I'm going to say no, because that would involve FAQing all the data sheets straight away. And
not at all. They just go refer. They just say that just refer to the all these. It'll just say it in the rulebook. All these update all of their relevant entries.
Maybe that
because they're going to do it with blast weapons. They're going to do it with blast weapons.
That seems like it's more of it's an index of, I don't know. Yeah, maybe. But that seems to be too much of tampering with a data sheet than something like Blast, which is effectively becoming like those old universal special rules. Well, they might just say invuln saves can't be better than a 4-up. In which case, then you've solved that problem.
Well, I'm just saying because they've already announced that they're gonna reduce minus modifiers. I mean, and that is a data sheet kerfuffle. That's changing.
Well, no, the thing is though, like flyers already have I reckon you're going to be able to. That they're going to be limiting the buffs you can put on yourself, but not stackable. But negative ones that your opponent implies on themselves before they shoot still do stack. So, like, say you're a Laytok and you're -1, you can't lightning fast reflex to get -2. Yeah. But if your opponent moves and fires a heavy weapon, which is -1 to hit when it moves and shoots, it then becomes -2. Because in other words, if you're moving and firing a heavy weapon,
that's an interesting point, though, Joe.
You're hitting the plane at the same ballistic skill as everyone else in the unit that's carrying an assault weapon.
Oh, that is an interesting point. How are they going to account for that interaction?
Well, they might not. They just might simplify it to no minus is more than -1, which is what they've said. But whether there's any nuance to that,
then it makes heavy weapon having the heavy weapon rule and the power fist rule and the thunderhammer rule completely pointless.
Oh yeah, well, in those specific examples.
Yeah, but if you go into combat with an elf, like a Harlequin player, right? And he's already -1 to hit. on
Why?
himself because of a psychic power.
Or
used.
because of that Harlequin
Because of,
thing
like-
we were talking about last podcast.
Yeah, or lightning fast reflex is a -1. And you run in swinging with a unit of Terminators or aggressors, because they're primaris, they're new. Aggressors, which are -1 to hit because they've all got power fists, right? Then they're hitting you the same with their fist as what they would be before you even put the powers on, which then makes that whole power redundant.
I mean, that is a specific example, but it is interesting, right? Because ultimately, if they've stipulated that there's never going to be any more than a -1 modifier, yeah, it's an interesting interaction because it basically means that heavy weapons now are as good at shooting flyers while walking around as they would be under any normal circumstances, which is it's an interesting interaction.
Well, the thing is, I think Joe's sort of got a point. I think.
Well done, Joe.
Well, no, but what I mean is it will just be worded that minuses in terms of like aura abilities and debuffs, like psychic powers, flying super fast, things that will innately affect you from something else. Yeah, won't stack. But then, as Joe said, moving or having a power fist, that's sort of on you as a model or unit.
How about we go back to, the glory of older editions, and when you move with a heavy weapon, you just can't shoot it?
That's awful.
What are you talking about? What are you talking about? It was clear.
That would completely, I think, or they just change it to snap shooting.
Oh my god.
Fire
Snap
shooting.
Sixes.
You're snap shooting.
By the way, on the topic of snap shooting, everything now hits on 6s, they said, didn't they?
Yeah. But that also doesn't make any sense if that rule only makes sense if you can get additional minuses to hit, because the average ballistic skill in the game is 4.
That is true. There you go, Joe. Look at you coming at them with the logic gap. It's like everything hits on 6 because no one will be ever reduced to a minus that is sufficient enough. The thing they really
it is.
Sorry, Phil.
Well, unless of course it is the thing that Joe said, where if you got a heavy weapon, that will still stack onto it.
Oh, it's interesting. Interesting.
Or they've just said that for clarifying things like orcs or other things that have a 6.
Yeah, but orcs already have that.
Yeah, they do already have that.
Yeah, but now they're just making it a universal rule that they don't need to have in one particular codex to quantify.
Orcs have that, and they get an additional hit every time they roll a 6. Or an additional roll to hit. And they've got their ability that makes it go off on 5s. All the madness.
So I imagine that, because then also that kind of makes that rule not like special. So
it is still special because they get more shots.
They get more shots.
Which is, you could argue it's too good as it is currently.
Well, exactly. I think that's why, because I guess with the minor stacking, it was like, wait, orcs can shoot better than guardsmen. Because they can just hit on 6s when no one else could.
Yeah.
Yeah. It depends whether that was something he was just sort of saying flippantly, or whether that was a statement of truth of you can always hit on 6s.
But all it means to me is I'm taking my hornets out to the woodshed.
Smashing them up with a hammer.
Exactly. Putting the gun to their heads and calling that a day. Although, to be fair, what I like about that situation is it means I just get to put the pulse lasers back on the Hornets and just run it as they were always intended, which will possibly be better, but we'll see. One of the things I think we universally didn't like the look of until we actually saw the actual models is the new Necro Warrior. He had a very derpy face, didn't he, in the video? I remember being on a chat with the guys, and we were like, "Oh, here it comes, here it comes!" And then the face kind of came into focus, and it had that really vacant, very very kind of special expression.
That why mother kind of look. Why did you do this to me?
What has become of me?
You're specifically talking about what was like a sort of, it looked like a 3D render of a painted model, or a 3D scan of a painted model that they then rendered in 3D so they could do this kind of spinning around thing up close.
I mean, it just looked terrible in that particular point, and I was like, oh god, have they changed the because Necrons have really iconic faces. Like the face of the Necron is this really menacing skeletal face on, with all the kind of awesome sci-fi, elements thrown in for good measure. And that 3D render had none of it. And I thought, wow, are they making the Necron Warrior look a little bit more simple to try and reflect the narrative? Or is this what they envision for the new range? Do they think this looks good? But fortunately for all involved, they very quickly then afterwards revealed what the actual miniatures actually look like, and we all breathed a sigh of relief and went, oh, thank God, they're actually really, really cool, and nothing like that terrible 3D render. So I felt like that was a bit of a misstep within the reveal. I mean, what was your thoughts on the actual Crons when you finally saw them, Phil?
Yeah, actually really good. Like I said, that initial one was a bit funny looking. I'm almost surprised that they redid the Necron Warrior, because the kit isn't that bad, with the exception of the weird plastic Perspex rods, which always have air bubbles in, which is something we talked about a few episodes ago, I think. And they've solved that just by replacing it with that kind of weird sort of dot motif, which is now much more of a thing within the range once you see the new models. The weird sort of three-legged one, I was like, it's a bit odd, but in a way I was like, it kind of makes more sense if that's replacing the destroyers maybe. But then it doesn't seem like it is, because the destroyer models still exist and are being redone by the looks of it. I don't think overall the new models look good, but the ones that they previewed on the Saturday were pretty much just the Necron Warriors. And then it was like the Sunday, they were like, here's a photo of like an entire range of models, and there's a ton of them, and they all look pretty incredible.
I mean, I suppose this is actually, although actually before I get into that, let's hear what Joe thought of the new Cron Warriors. What was your vibe on that, Joe?
I really like them. I think they're really, really good, because they've given them a bit of character, a bit of panache, keeping them looking cool with like they've used cabling to make it look like their intestines are hanging out. They've got a bit of wear and tear to them.
Yeah, some of the eye sockets are missing and stuff.
And they're all in different poses, which I quite like, because the current range of Necron Warriors, it sounds really bad, but everyone builds them wrong.
Wow, okay, there it is.
Because the Necron Warrior kit is designed to be hunched over with their arms kind of just drooping down, carrying this gun. So they've got like this loping kind of gaits to them. Whereas people try and build them like stood upright with their arm, like holding their gun, firing from the hip.
Yeah.
That doesn't really work, because that's how because the kit's not designed to do that. So it always looks a bit wrong. And the neck joint connected to the sprue does my head in, because it's two connection points that are connected into the cheeks.
Yeah.
So when it's off the head, it always ruins it. And the neck joint is two prongs that go in the same place, which then cradle the back of the skull, which only works when the body is hunched over. So when people stand the model up, they kind of have this weird head kind of floating, and they normally glue the model's chin to where the neck connection is.
So that weird little kind of like shape thing they've got in their chest.
Yeah, so it doesn't look right. Whereas now they've been designed through the Push Fit series, so they can actually be posed in all kinds of places, and it looks more natural.
I'll tell you,
I really like that.
I'll tell you the thing, and to sort of continue on your point, Joe, about the kind of wear and tear of the unit. I mean, the thing that's always been important about the Necrons is there's, varying degrees of sentience within the Necron range, and obviously the level of kind of prestige and maintenance given to a Necron Lord is definitely not seen within the Necron Warriors, and previously there were very few, if any, design features that showcase the ramshackle nature of the warrior versus the pristine, appearance of the more altogether lords and characters. And I think that's beautifully represented in this, in the way that they've kind of brought it to life. Also, as well, I'm a massive fan of when Games Workshop add elements to their miniatures that supports the narrative, but also supports some of the more kind of broader aspects of the way this army functions. And one of the things I love about these miniatures is the little scarab details that they've added in places. The idea that these are always reassembling husk warrior creatures that are made up of everything and anything that they can kind of do to get themselves put back together, and kind of, really kind of illustrates that reanimation protocol. The idea that this is an army of skeleton robot warriors that are marching across the battlefield with, thousands of scarabs and other kind of like mechanisms that are constantly assisting them in reanimation. So early Necrons were more kind of metaphysical in a way that they would phase in and out of reality, and they would kind of, reform kind of, almost kind of, non-corporeally, as it were. They would just literally just kind of come back. Whereas now there's much more of an emphasis on the idea that these guys are kind of getting reassembled constantly, which is really cool. And you see those details even in things like the way their arms look. Like, some of them have got, a bit more armor plating on the arms. Some of them have, got a lot less. Some of them have got bits of cabling hanging out of them. Some of them have got, scarabs, trying to kind of put their feet back together as they're walking along. It's, I honestly, there's so much more to these miniatures than that initial one kind of gave them credit, and I actually think it's really beautiful. I think, again, it just injects so much more character into the range, which is really, really cool. And I know, Phil, you're someone who absolutely loves those opportunities to kind of add, like, more kind of character. I know we've talked before about the idea of having the ability to just put, serfs and, other kind of like servitors in amongst like Space Marine armies to depict the way this stuff kind of functions. So it's just cool to see that the Necrons are kind of getting that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they always have the tiny scarabs coming in the basic Necron kits to do that on the basing. But what people would always do is they'd take 4 of them and make it into like a unit of scarabs instead.
Well, that was kind of what they were intended for, yeah.
Yeah, but now, like, I think even the scarab itself has like had a bit of a redesign to look a bit more to the scale that it's meant to be, like a lot smaller. It looks really good. Yeah, I think there's going to be so much new potential. It feels like that the whole range is getting completely redone, which I know isn't the case, but they've, in that kind of army showcase photo that they released, there was literally like one model that was like an old model. I think it may be 2. I think there was a Triarch Stalker, and there's the new Necron Overlord that came out, or Cryptek.
Yeah, they also had the flying croissants still, didn't they?
Oh yes, yeah, that was in there.
When they had like the second wave of new stuff, like all that staying. So like the Immortal, the Doom Scythe, Night Scythe, the bikes, what are they called?
Oh, the ghost kills or something. No, not ghost kills.
The ghost kills. What are they called? Tomb Blades.
Tomb Blades, thank you.
They're staying, and like the Tomb Spider and all that kind of stuff.
Which is a beautiful miniature, to be fair.
Yeah, I love.
But now they've got these new giant sort of spider walker things, and they're a bit War of the World, which I really love the look of. But also they look a lot like the Blackstone Fortress.
Well, they've got the Doomsday. They've got the Doomsday Ark's massive cannon on their heads, which I quite like.
Yeah.
Can I suppose actually this is a perfectly good time to get into this side of things, talking about some of the alternate perspectives on this reveal. So as far as the reveal was concerned, or the live stream, this technically was the last miniature that we saw in this entire reveal, right? So they went, look, a Space Marine with a chainsword. And we kind of went, ooh, that's cool. And then we saw one sculpt of Space Marine with chainsword. We saw 5 sculpts of Necron warriors, but that was it. Now, clearly GW had intended to then start to drip feed out the future elements, but I mean, what did we think of the decision? If it was that there were no leaks, do you think that you would have been fully satisfied by the end of the weekend with having seen 1 Space Marine with a chainsword and 5 Necron warriors and a series of close-up images of the Silent King?
No, not at all. It was all. But the thing is, though, it's like 800% more than what we got for the 8th edition drop, which was a picture of a helmet. So can't really complain on that front. But it's literally, they've given us a picture of a Space Marine, which we already have, because you can give an Intercessor Sergeant a bolt pistol and a chainsaw anyway, but it's just got running legs.
Yeah.
That's the only difference. But they might as well just said, look, we gave Space Marines running legs.
But are we also, and I suppose this is the interesting thing, isn't it? It's like, how do we feel about that general perspective? Because by all accounts, at this point in time, they've announced a new edition, they've shown us a few new miniatures, they've told us a bunch of stuff about the fact that the books will still be valid, and they're obviously still got, at this point, they've still got like an hour more to talk through, where they've already told us they're going to start talking about some of the rules and give us something of an initial insight. Is it that we as a community now have come to expect too much from these kind of situations? Or, is this just one of these symptomatic problems of, the modern world and the fact that we need to know everything as soon as possible straight away? I mean, because it is reasonable to assert that I, like you, Joe, and I'm sure like you as well, Phil, if all we had seen and still had only seen is a few Necro Warriors and a running Space Marine, I don't know, would we have come away going, oh, actually, it's not too great? Because I know a lot of people who came away from this live stream a bit underwhelmed because I think they were expecting more. But do you think that's fair or realistic?
Well, I think the James Workshop segment, which came after the model preview, was the thing that saved the day. It was like the most interesting bit. It was like, here's top 10 things about new rules changes. And they're all fantastic. And as a person that plays with tanks, I was like, even better. It sounds really good.
Well, because it is worth highlighting that at this point of the reveal, right, we just saw a really great trailer. Then we were told 9th edition's a thing. Then they did a bit of filler because it turned out that every 10 minutes they had to move on to a segment, but they ended up in that typical problem where they don't actually have enough to say to fill the 10-minute segments. So they just sort of run out of things to say, but then they end up in that really weird kind of like radio DJ problem where they know the news has got to come on in a minute, but they've got nothing left to say, so they end up doing really weird filler. And then the 10-minute segment would run around, and then they were, look, an intercessor with a chainsaw, and went, ooh, okay, cool, now we're going to talk about them for 10 minutes. And then, look, there's a Necron. Ooh, we're going to talk about that for 10 minutes. At this point, this was at the point during the live stream where I saw Tim, and I don't mean to drop you in it, Tim, but I'm going to call you out for this because why not? Where Tim just went, I'm so bored, and I was like, yeah, I kind of am too, because they followed up the Necron with, look, a book, and you were like, oh goody, a book. Like,
yeah, I mean, like, we're about to see a really, like, we're going to come back with some nice, cool content and a nice trailer, and the trailer is literally a picture of the front screen. It spins around a few times, and then it tells you the title of the book out loud, which you can obviously read yourself because you have eyes and you're already watching it. I think what they should have done, and what I would have been happy with, is if they'd released the promo video, which they did, on the Saturday. Sunday, they should have just released the James Workshop video. Because that's enough of a hint. It's exciting, it's funny, and it gives you the same amount of information that they put into that whole hour of Q&A. What they should have done is the Marine release, the Necron stuff, and the actual Q&A they did this previous weekend. They should just rolled all of that content into one section, and they could have filled an hour.
Well, I don't know.
I suppose there's multiple ways of approaching this side of things. So, and one thing I did want to kind of get to, and something I'm interested in as well, I personally am really disappointed in the amount of spoilers that happened with 9th edition. So, first of all, Saturday morning, the FAQ for 9th edition leaks everywhere. So, literally 5-6 hours before this live stream's about to hit, we're all reading the FAQ where they're addressing the fact that 9th edition is coming. And I tried to...
Can I just say, I was a good boy and I avoided it.
So I
because you guys had seen it and mentioned it, and I was like, oh, I just won't look at it then.
So I didn't read it, but I obviously, knowing that it was out there and knowing that obviously this was going to be a 9th edition thing was enough of a spoiler. We all sort of knew going into it that it was going to be 9th edition, right? But that was an interesting thing. But then literally the tirade of, or just the absolute, tidal wave of leaks that followed was just crazy. I mean, we had renders of everything, based on like greys or whatever you want to call them. Like they were literally like CG renders of everything. We had that blurry photo of the Necrons. People within moments after this broadcast had finished had data mined the website to the point that every miniature was out there. I mean, do we kind of feel like those spoilers have actually damaged the hype train for 9th edition? Because I have heard a lot of people being relatively underwhelmed by 9th edition so far. Yeah. And is that just a result of the culture of leaks and everything? And is it a shame that GW adopts the strategy that they adopt, where they turn around and go, oh, someone's done something, so we're just going to immediately publish it anyway, irrespective of our ongoing strategy for releasing this information? And then 2, how is it that Games Workshop has that many leaks? I mean, it's very unprofessional, to say the least, that these guys have the amount of leaks that they have. It's madness, right?
Yeah. I was really annoyed because literally 30 minutes before the release video and their live announcement, I'd seen everything. Everything that they were announced. So, and that just ruined it for me, kind of thing. It's like seeing a pirate version of a film and then going to see it at the cinema. Like it just kind of killed everything. And the fact that I'd seen more before it than what they announced in the Q&A kind of disheartened me a bit. I was like, how are they leaking information that you aren't even giving out on your big announcement? It kind of just killed it a little bit for me, I think.
I don't know. On one hand, yeah, I completely agree. I think that the leaks are sort of bad. However, the fact that it forced their hand to then give us some really good promo shots of the models on the Sunday sort of made the weekend, in terms of the reveals of Saturday and Sunday, a lot better. Because seeing all the Necrons and all the new Primaris Marines were like, oh wow, this is really cool. Like these models are awesome. This is fantastic. But the fact that you were meant to only see sort of chainsword intercessors and some Necrons in itself is a bit disappointing. I think if that's all it was meant to be, and that all this other stuff was meant to come much later.
I can understand though, from like a business side of view. So you've got 3 Psychic Awakening books that still haven't come out yet.
Yeah.
So they don't want to show off the new edition in all its glory when they've still got 3 publications to come out.
Yeah.
And a whole AdMech army to be released. So like, if you know 9th edition is coming out soon with new models and new cool kit, you are not going to spend any money on anything over the next few months because you want to save it as much as possible.
Well, I disagree. I think if you've got one of those armies, you're going to pick up that book because they'll still be relevant. Like the AdMech Codex probably won't be coming for a year.
Yeah, but no,
so you're going to get the Psychic Awakening version first.
I don't see many people buying like all that new AdMech stuff because 9th edition is coming out. I think less. Like obviously we can't tell because we won't see the numbers, but I reckon less people are going to buy the new AdMech stuff now than would have if they didn't know that 9th edition.
I don't know. It depends on who they are. If there's someone that collects AdMech and Space Marines, then maybe you're right. But if you collect, say, AdMech and like a non-Necron race, you'll probably be like, I'm going to buy this this AdMech stuff.
I mean, I'm going to buy a lot of AdMech stuff.
But the thing is, we don't know how the army's going to be composed now.
However you like, according to them.
Well, exactly. And the thing is, with my AdMech range that I own currently, I own a bunch of of vanguards and tech priest dominuses and characters and things, because they were the things that I was going to be using in 8th edition to supplement an Imperial Knight army. Whereas now I'm looking at it going, well, I probably need to get more Castellan robots and and flying dudes and cavalry and all the rest of it. But I just want those miniatures in my collection because, one, I know Joe's going to do a beautiful job of painting them for me, and two, I think they're just cool miniatures. So I think it's one of those things where I'm cool with that, because AdMech is never going to be one of my main army projects anyway. It's just cool to have them and add them to my collection. But yeah, I mean, again, I already have a very small AdMech force, so adding this stuff to it has been something of inevitability. That said, I probably will buy the book because I'm a lunatic that wants to own all the books, but I haven't picked up Saga of the Beast yet, and I'm not sure if I ever will, which is an interesting one, because obviously with the announced 9th edition, I am sort of looking at it going, well, I'm not going to play an Orc army anytime soon, and I'm not going to play a Space Wolf army anytime soon, and by the time I might even get around to thinking about it, that rule set is going to become irrelevant. So the fact that I know 9th is now a thing, had I been able to have bought Saga of the Beast before lockdown, I would have definitely have bought it. And if I was then, and I would have taken the hit to then see what happens when we migrate into 9th edition. But yeah, in this current climate, I'm like, But I probably will buy the AdMech stuff because I have a reason to. But I think the thing with the leaks and what's going on with it is very disappointing and kind of has kind of taken a lot of wind out of the sails. And I understand GW has adopted this policy of, if it leaks, we're just going to try and kind of take away the momentum of the people leaking things by just putting out the better looking imagery, so as we get the traffic and we get people looking at the miniatures and stuff. And I understand that's sort of their policy, but
all right, just to remind you, this is the second time this has happened. Do we all remember October?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Because all of the new cool Orc buggies got released in September by people who were leaking it, which meant that Games Workshop, when they actually officially showed it off in October, like, it'd already been out and everyone had seen it.
Yeah.
Then everyone complained that, like, October was terrible, GW wasn't doing a very good job. As though, in actual fact, GW had actually planned all of this ahead, and someone just ruined it for them.
Yeah, I genuinely think GW, as a massive company, bigger company than British Gas, I hear, I think they need to up their game when it comes to sorting out these leaks. I think it's getting ridiculous. A few little odds and sods here and there when they used to appear in pictures of White Dwarf is somewhat fair enough, because that's in the supply chain. But I've seen PDFs of the Necron Codex front cover. I mean, where is that coming from? Oh, that's crazy.
Printers,
well, potentially.
Or the designer.
But honestly,
or anyone that's in that chain of proofreading that.
They need to crack down on it though, man. They need to get that stuff under control. I'm not advocating that they need to get into a situation where they're potentially threatening people's livelihoods or anything over this sort of stuff, but they need to tighten up their ship when it comes to all this stuff, because this is a very, 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 they're in a situation now where their intellectual property, Warhammer 40,000, is £1 million. I mean, it's actually closer to £1 billion intellectual property now. It's huge. They really need to sort this out, because it does damage their perception of their business by everyone. I mean, I look at this stuff and I think it's a bit amateurish that they've got this many leaks. I mean, don't get me wrong, I, like everyone, was happy to see it because I like the fact that I got to see stuff, but I think, in the grand scheme of things, it would have been nicer had they been able to actually implement their strategy effectively. So whoever it is that Games Workshop, who's out there leaking all their stuff, could you just stop? And, I don't really understand what you're gaining from it, but obviously just
traffic to their website.
Yeah. But they're not,
that's all it is.
They're not. They're just putting it out on Facebook on 40k for grown-ups, like anonymously, and then it just kind of gets spread from there.
Yeah.
So they're not even taking like the praise for it.
Well, you wouldn't want the praise for it, right? Because you assume the praise for it would be a P45.
Like a large lawsuit, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the thing, right? It's like I just don't understand why people need to do it. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think in older times where GW was so tight-lipped about everything, it kind of felt somewhat validated because it was the only way we could find out stuff. Because I mean, it's hard to think that 5 years ago we didn't know something was coming until it went on pre-order.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the crazy thing. Like, people who've only been in this hobby since 8th edition don't appreciate this. There were years where literally they go, hey, here's a new thing. You'd be like, what? And it's out next week. Okay. Like, it's just like, it was bonkers. And the leaks in that situation at least kind of gave us a little bit of insight. But yeah, I mean, this is the thing, right? The guy, when you hear people like Chapter Master Valric, and he talks about his sources, my source at Games Workshop tells me this, that, and the other, I think to myself, what is that guy getting out of that relationship? Like, is Valric paying him? I mean, and if he isn't, why is he doing it? Like, what does anyone within Games Workshop gain from leaking Games Workshop's IPs? It just doesn't make any sense to me. But unless they are gaining, unless Valric is paying his sources, unless someone is, making it worth their while. But if that is the case as well, I'm probably even more annoyed with the situation, because that seems really underhanded and not very, very, very fair or whatever. But anyway, look, there you go. So look, anyway, Tim said he was bored, and they showed a book, and we all saw the book, and the bloke who wrote the book talked about the book, and it was about Guilliman and Ultramarines continuing their crusade to save the universe. Because if you haven't figured it out already, Guilliman's something of a big deal. Ultramarines are the best. Carry on. Any more that we need to say about the book? Phil, you're more on lore, man. Tell us more.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think there's a few interesting things. They basically tried to say it's equivalent to the Horus Heresy novels and the Beast Arising. It's like a long, ongoing saga, pushing the storyline forwards, exploring the Indomitus Crusade. Although I saw someone had actually pointed out that basically the two novels, Dark Imperium, happens that they've done the first book and the second book, and that actually happens at the end of the Indomitus Crusade. Like, that's all about the winding down of the Crusade, and Robote Guilliman's got to go to Ultramar to sort of fend off the Death Guard. Mm-hmm. So, and the way they talked about 9th edition is very much like, you can do your own crusade as a narrative option. So they're clearly wanting to explore this as an idea. But it's weird that 8th edition had sort of skipped over the Indomitus Crusade. Pretty much all the lead up was all about Cadia, which they skipped over. And it's like only now in 9th edition they're going, oh, actually that was a really cool like narrative thing that we can go back and explore. So it sort of feels like the timeline's a bit all over the place, in terms of, I think they just wanted to get the Indomitus Crusade out the way, so everyone can justify having Primaris Marines. But it was such a good idea, people are now going back and going, okay, let's play this out. Let people play the Indomitus Crusade.
I think they have to jumble the timeline around a bit, though, to kind of, because you don't want to progress the story too quickly.
Well, no, that's true.
Because then, where do we, it's like they win the Crusade, Chaos is defeated, the Emperor's dead, but then he comes back alive. This has all happened in the last year. Everyone's happy and it's peaceful. The game is done. No, everyone go to Age of Sigmar. You need to keep that perpetual misery going.
Well,
the perpetual war.
I think obviously it was always really interesting as well, wasn't it? The setting for 8th edition, because there was all the events of the Gathering Storm, and then 8th edition was set 500 years in the future after that. So it was literally the idea that they're like, cool, Cadia's gone, this stuff has all happened, there's now Yunari, and all this stuff is happening, and Primaris Marines are a thing, and we're now entering the story hundreds of years into the future after all these events have transpired, and we assume that Space Marines have gotten over their initial frustrations and concerns with Primaris Marines because, for narrative reasons, it's not worth worrying about the fact that Space Marines wouldn't accept Primaris Marines under normal narrative stipulations. But we've gotten over that, and we're moving forwards with things, and we're talking about, there was a crusade, and this all sort of stuff happened, and, Guilliman got captured by Fulgrim at one point, didn't he? During the narrative that led up to 8th, Joe?
If you go by Dark Imperium, the book, that actually starts off at the end, the end of the Horus Heresy, once they'd been routed.
Yeah, but
yes,
that's when Guilliman gets wounded.
Yes,
and then he goes into stasis after that.
But you're thinking about Magnus.
Ah, yes, Magnus captures him for a bit, doesn't he?
Yeah,
yeah. Anyway, I mean, I think the problem always is with GW, I find, and again, it's only symptomatic of their situation, which is they've got big storylines with lots of different players and lots of different factions and things that all come in, and they always want to sort of view everything through the prism of one specific faction, i.e. Guilliman and the Ultramarines now. So they always have to sort of tell that narrative from that perspective, but then they have to factor in all these other variables. But the issue they always sort of have with this stuff is early doors, much like with Age of Sigmar. They've moved the narrative forwards, but they don't want to commit to any one thing because they're also trying to ensure that they don't upset anyone too much early doors. So they've got to try and feel things out and define stuff because it's uncharted territory. So it's interesting what they've kind of done with it, and I think it is good that they left some ambiguity in that period of time between the end of the Gathering Storm and where we arrived in 8th edition, so as you can start to fill in the gaps. But my closing thought on this book is that's probably the worst illustration of Guilliman I've seen in a while. He looks like an old granddad, doesn't he? Stood at the top there.
I thought he looks a bit like Boris Johnson.
He does, doesn't he? There it is. You're absolutely spot on. That is slightly more muscular Boris Johnson.
And chiseled, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, more chiseled Boris. He just looks really, really sort of... He doesn't look anything... He's not a handsome man, is what I would say.
He's got that craggy Roman face, isn't he?
He just looks awful. It's literally like, oh, so that's supposed to be an inspiring hero, is it? The old man who's kind of given up on everything. He looks terrible. I mean, I like the fact that he's got a little crown on and he's got, the whole kind of, illumination, saintly thing going on, but yeah.
I'm going to say, to give him credit, he looks a lot better than his miniatures face.
Yeah.
That is true, but that's why they gave him a helmeted version, obviously.
Exactly.
Yeah. But he is like 20,000 years old, though.
Yeah, but when they describe the Primarchs in the books, they're supposed to be the absolute apex of what you think people can be.
Yeah, but running the Imperium's got to take its toll on it. Look at Barack Obama after running America for 4 years. He went pretty grey, didn't he?
He also managed America. Well, he did America for 8 years, mate.
Well, exactly. He looked like that after 4, and he's like, "Oh, I got 4 more."
I see your point. And the midway point was his lowest ebb. Anyway, There you go. Right, okay. So then we get into an interesting bit where they tell us about the 9 different things or 9 new things from Warhammer 40,000. So
you're skipping over the Mike Brandt's testing bit, but. Do you want to talk about that or just skip over?
I mean, we can talk about the Mike Brandt testing bit if you want to talk about the Mike Brandt testing bit. So there's this guy called Mike Brandt. He used to be involved or organise Nova. I assume he either does still organise Nova, which is probably a massive conflict of interest, so he just chooses not to speak about it, or cashes a cheque while still cashing a cheque from Games Workshop. Who knows how that works? But don't be surprised if Nova becomes the most significant event in the Warhammer 40,000 competitive calendar. But anyway, the point is this guy has been brought in because Games Workshop very sensibly had the pick of the litter. They looked around at the people involved in running competitive 40k. Obviously, North America is a massive competitive 40k market. It's a huge draw for the audience to get out there and play tournaments together. So they very sensibly recruited someone who's very, involved in all of that. and brought him in to not just obviously manage kind of competitive match play elements, but quite clearly to start to deliver a strategy to start to refine GW's own approach to tournament play. Lots of language towards new missions, and these new missions being great for competitive play, and GW's aspirations that they want competitive players to start adopting these missions. So yeah, some really interesting points from the guy. I mean, Joe, you're the man who spends all his time worrying about competitive gaming these days. What's your vibe on this?
I really like the idea that competitive, like ITC and normal 40k, like the match play rule set is the same.
Do you think that's where they're going to go with it now, though? Do you think
I reckon it's where they're going to go, and everyone's singing from it, because there's so many events around the world now that all run different types of mission packs, kind of thing, and every one you go to, you've got to learn something new. The amount of times that we've been to events and I've come up to the table and my opponent's like, I've never done this mission before. I don't know what ITC is. I just kind of turned up. I don't know what I'm doing. And you kind of have to coach them through it, kind of thing. Whereas if everyone's playing rules, the missions out of the book, then they can practice at home and they know what they're getting into. What I would like to see, however, is more missions. Because ITC and the Eternal War kind of missions in the book, there's only ever 6, and after 3 years, you're pretty bored of them by the end of it. I'd like to see like 12 or 18 or whatever, and then you can just play random ones the whole time.
I think they're going to do a lot more missions, mission specific for the 3 ways of playing. But I think that tournament play and match play are going to be separate. I think tournament play is going to be tournament play is match play, but match play isn't tournament play, if that makes sense. Tournament play is going to have its own missions and its own sort of set of criteria above and beyond regular match play.
I mean, we've said this before, right? I often feel like GW does actually need to create a living, like, rule book scenario specifically for competitive play to create something that is separate from normal 40k. So again, and potentially feeding into this app opportunity that they're going to be launching soon as well, is if they actually created a comprehensive, balanced, competitive version of 40k, which had banned units or rotating units, getting rid of some stuff, bringing in other stuff to try and actually kind of implement some level of competitive gameplay. I think that could be actually a really interesting thing. Obviously, they'd need to be very strict on when they bring in bans and when they sort of tweak things. But if all of a sudden, as a competitive community, we had a living rulebook that was working digitally that we all had to kind of subscribe to in order to engage in competitive play, I think that would be something quite interesting. And if I can put my tinfoil hat on for a moment between the app and the recruitment of this gentleman, I genuinely believe that Games Workshop is making a play to not only do away with Battle Scribe, or at least kind of control the Battle Scribe market, but I also think they're making a play to get rid of the ITC as well.
Well, these are the guys, so Frontline Gaming, who run the ITC kind of thing, and they kind of go hand in hand together with GW. I think maybe it's more of a case of they are working together in it, because if you take over the ITC, then you kind of bin off like Best Coast pairings. Yeah, and people.
I think the app will bin off Best Coast pairings as well.
But then you kind of are they gonna incorporate a ranking system in it as well?
I mean, here's the thing, right?
There is a ranking system.
Here's the thing, right? GW control every aspect of their hobby, every aspect bar one, and the one thing they don't control is competitive play, and competitive play is a massive focus for their business, and it is also a aspect of their business that's been massively profitable for many other businesses within the United States of America and all around the world. So, to me, when I look at this and I look at GW historically and I look at the situation throughout the course of 8th edition, yeah, sure, we've let these guys carry on as they were and we've tolerated it and we've, done what we've done to understand the market as best we can. But if I think about things the way I've seen many businesses do business over the years, and Games Workshop is no different, even though they sell fluffy soldiers and, or toy soldiers and it's all fun and fluffy, these guys are a humongous business right now. And for them just to not have control of one of the biggest aspects of their business seems insane to me. And if you look at things like, if we use fighting games as an example, years ago Capcom made a play to take control of the competitive Street Fighter V scene by implementing the Capcom Pro Tour, and they worked in synergy with the independent scene, so all the events still took place and the event organizers were able to drive revenue through ticket sales and exhibition spaces and still putting on the events they were putting on. But every aspect of Street Fighter V as a competitive game system is controlled by Capcom and their Pro Tour. And I think that's one of the interesting things. And I think Games Workshop need to make a similar play, because I think ultimately, I think it doesn't make sense for GW to put so much power in the hands of a very well-run organization in the ITC, but not a Games Workshop operation.
I don't know if they want to go to the effort of doing like world leagues. I can definitely see them doing a bit more of a sort of X-Wing style, where they go, we're going to organise official tournaments where there's like prizes that go to independent stores, which is what they do already for Warhammer Underworld's Kill Team. So it's like, why not do that for AOS? Why not do that for 40k? And therefore they don't need to, let's say, compete with ITC, because ITC is just a ranking system that can still exist. But what they do is they go, this is an official tournament pack that the ITC will then adopt.
But I think here's the interesting thing, though, Phil. You say they wouldn't go to the effort of it. They've hired this guy for a reason, right? They've not just hired him to do playtesting, because they had playtesters, right? They had competitive playtesters. He was probably one of them before he signed on the dotted line and joined the GW team.
Well, he probably still is.
He definitely still is. Of course he is. But this is the thing. It's like, you say they wouldn't go through the effort. Think about what a competitive league for 40k means for the business. There's streaming opportunities. There's subscription revenue. There's data that they can gather. Because at the moment, BCP is gathering tons and tons of data that they're using to inform the community. I mean, if you listen to the 40k Stat Center, is it, Joe?
Yeah, 40k Stat Center is really good for
exactly
for just sheer amount of like data and information and percentages. Like they can tell you how many people are running each army, and then what units they're using and what's most popular, and like they can see weekend by weekend what's rising in popularity and what's going down.
Yeah. So why is that being controlled by an external body, right? Like that's the sort of stuff that's interesting to me, and I'm sure interesting to GW. So suggesting that there's no reward for this is a lucrative business for many different companies, but it's not for Games Workshop yet. I mean, obviously they're benefiting from model sales, but they're not really kind of able to completely keep on top of this stuff. And also, and this is the problem GW as a rules writing team has more than anything, right? They have to implement rules to affect a system that isn't even theirs, right? When they came along and started making changes to Leviathan Dreadnoughts, it was exclusively because Leviathan Dreadnoughts as Iron Hands were too powerful within ITC format. So they're making changes to their actual game because of things that have nothing to do with their game. And that is a complexity that is baffling to me, and has always been baffling to me. I don't understand why Games Workshop have ever let the ITC officially have as much control as they've had. And I think, Reese and the team at Frontline Gaming have always sort of said, well, the ITC isn't a core part of our business. It's just something we do because we like it. And at the end of the day, if the ITC can manage with the relative infrastructure that they have, I think GW can do a job far better and will do it willingly, because the upside is they've got live streams, they've got potential for like pro tours, they've got potential like other kind of like revenue opportunities. I mean, this is the thing, right? It's like if GW came along and did what Capcom did and put a massive cash injection into competitive play, you might start to see the numbers increase, because from an esports perspective, people pay attention when prize pools of millions and millions of dollars are on the line. Now, I'm not saying Games Workshop are going to put millions and millions of dollars into it, but they might put, a few $100,000 on the table. And then what does that become, right? I mean, it gets interesting. I think Games Workshop are a way from doing it, but I think we're on that pathway, right? And again, it gets interesting because there's a lot of other kind of opportunities that kind of come off the back of that. And yeah, I don't know. It's very interesting. The combination of the app, the combination of the recruitment of this guy, and what they're saying about their missions. I just think, I don't know. It would make sense to me if I was in their position to get rid of the ITC and have it for myself.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be great if the app was all singing and all dancing, and you could use it as a battle scribe to create your own rosters. You can use it to they did say that you can kind of play through the turns, I think, so you can use it to keep track of your scores. It'd be great if you could just like sync up with your partner and go like, this is the two armies that are getting paired off, and that data just flies off to Games Workshop, so they've got all that stats, a bit like the 40k stat center. If it also then has like tournament pairing abilities that BCP do and worldwide rankings, like that is a real all singing, all dancing app, because that app also includes all the codexes and stuff as well. Like, I wish it would be that good, but I'm a bit skeptical that it's going to have everything in there. If you look at sort of what the AOS one does, I imagine it'll be a bit more like that. Which is a bit simpler. Yeah, I mean, who knows? They haven't talked about it much. They didn't talk about it at all on the Q&A, which was a little bit disappointing, because it'd be great to know what it does. Like, that is almost the make or break, like, that can take 9th edition to being, like, cool to, like, amazing. Yeah. Like, if it's all living rules, digital codex, like, £1 a month subscription like AOS sort of thing, because they did say one of the cool things they did announce that if you buy a physical book, you then unlock the digital version in the app, which I think is huge, and something that everyone said, like, just do that'd be great.
I mean, it's a step in the right direction, right? Because again, it that massively helps us plug into a living rulebook conundrum, or situation rather than a conundrum, and I think that's very useful for all of us, because I think again, because all of a sudden the FAQs just become part of our digital version of the book. I mean, that is such a step in the right direction. It's unbelievable. And again, if the app even has like functionality around, like, I don't know, maybe it unlocks like stratagem decks that you can actually use digitally and keep track of or stuff. I mean, again, who knows what level of depth and complexity they can unlock within that thing. But yeah, I remain hopeful. And here's the thing, right? If I was the CEO bigwig at Games Workshop, I would definitely be asking the questions to my subordinates: why don't I own competitive gaming yet? And I would imagine that I would be giving them a lot of aggro to come up with a strategy to own it, because it just seems mad to me that they're leaving that money on the table when it's their intellectual property and they could have it. But anyway, that's me thinking aloud about how people in businesses behave. And as nice as I think the ITC is, and I appreciate what they've done, at the end of the day, I would far prefer Games Workshop to run a official version of the ITC than have the ITC, because as much as I have enjoyed playing the ITC and I'm always interested in like the rankings and see how people perform in it, I don't like the fact that the ITC has as much sway over the game as they have, and I don't like the fact that people... I have said on multiple occasions how displeased I am with the way that ITC sort of does things from a rules perspective, not from an overall organisational perspective, but just from how they seem to wield unbelievably large amounts of influence over the game. And yeah, I don't know, Joe. What's your final thoughts on all this before we move on?
It is a weird one. I would like to see it all come under the same kind of envelope in a way, because I like competitive play, but I know I'd like it to be a lot more accessible for other people. It's kind of like, say you invented the game, and then someone came along and was like, okay, I like what you've done there, but we're going to play it our way. And you're like, okay, cool, that's like, you do you. And then they come to you and be like, I want you to change the game for me, kind of thing. And you're like, no, I made it. This is how I no. I've made it more popular, so it belongs to me now, kind of thing.
Well, one interesting thing that they talked about in the Q&A when they talk about terrain, so they talk about how terrain's going to play a bigger part, and there's all these different terrain types. One of them was there's going to be like a obscured type of terrain that means if you're touching it or within it, that you can't be seen. And that's very, it sort of struck me as that sounds like the weird sometimes ITC rule, sometimes not ITC rule of if you're touching cover, you're in cover.
Oh no, that
behind a wall.
That isn't an ITC rule. That's an LVO Q&A.
Yeah, it was like a weird. Some people in ITC
or
play
FAQ,
that way.
sorry.
Other people don't. So yeah, it was.
Yeah. There is no ITC rule about touching cover. It's in an LVO FAQ.
Yeah, but because of that, I think lots of people play it that way within the ITC.
Oh yeah, but they're
ITC events.
But they're wrong. But they're not wrong because it depends on the ruling of, because a lot of people use the LVO FAQ to adjudicate their tournaments because they see it as the gold standard, which is fair enough. But yeah, I just think look, I think ITC has been great, and it's been a great thing to have to take us to where we're at. I just would much prefer to see it replaced by an officially sanctioned thing. And, you know, obviously for people who still love the ITC and want to kind of keep it alive, because I know there'll be resistance to this, and there'll be people listening to this going, can't believe you're saying you want the ITC to go away. You know, it is what it is. But the thing is, you know, I know people will try and hold on to the ITC and try and keep it for a while. And it will take time for it to migrate away. But again, it's a really interesting year as well, because already the ITC in 2020 has become, you know, a very weird situation because of the coronavirus, and ultimately they've said that this ITC season is now a bit of a blowout. So it's a perfect opportunity for GW to swoop in and go, cool, so for next year it's going to be us now, or we're going to start our season in January, and you can gain points at the LVO or something. I don't know. It's going to be interesting, because that's the other thing as well, right? If they introduce a comprehensive tournament system, all of a sudden Warhammer World events can be worth points within their comprehensive tournament system, which means more money for their events. Because there are lots of people who don't go to Warhammer World tournaments because they go, it's not got any ITC points. You know? Well, all of a sudden it's like, yeah, but you can get, you know, whatever GW format points are now, and so it might help their ticket sales as well, which is no bad thing for them, surely.
Yeah.
But there you go. So broadly on the topic of what Joe said earlier about competitive play being accessible to everybody, how do we feel about the fact that narrative play is now being aggressively pushed to everybody in the form of Crusades?
Love it.
I actually really like Crusades. I think it, because it kind of, it splits the market, as it were. You've got people who want to just play competitive, and there's people who just want to play the game and have a fun story and just enjoy the universe as it is, kind of thing. And like, I'd quite like to, because if, say for instance, you play at a club, like, you could play lots and lots of different people there, and it's still fresh, kind of thing. Because I've known like some clubs which have like kind of prospered quite nicely, and then they've gone very hardcore competitive, and then all of a sudden everyone's not playing 40k because they're a little bit sick of it, because it's just a bit too aggro. Whereas if you kind of have the Crusade stuff in it, like every week. You're like, oh, I'm like, you killed my unit, so like this I've got a new unit in my army now, and I've spent the points to kind of make them veterans or whatever. And I think it just kind of keeps it a bit more exciting for when you play again.
How about you, Phil? I mean, obviously you've already said you love it. Do you want to expand on that point?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like 8th edition was great, but they leaned very hard into match play. All the Warhammer community articles were predominantly aimed at people that do match play, and they always tailored this is an amazing combo you can do in a sort of slightly cheesy, isn't this not quite broken, but isn't this a great thing for your match players? And it's like, I play match play, and I like the idea of match play in a not necessarily competitive environment, but just as viewing it as a balanced game. Like, I want to play points. I don't, power level's great, especially if you don't have Battlescribe. But the idea of having an ongoing campaign that I can do that doesn't really rely on anyone else is amazing. They're basically taking the format of Warcry, where you have your individual warband. Your own warband is doing its own thing. You can play a bunch of different people. You don't need to even play against that same person ever again. It can just be like a one-off game, but it still counts towards how you're progressing. And that's what this is all about. So it's really cool. Like, we can meet up, play some games. My Krieg or my Minotaurs are going on their campaign. They're evolving and ranking up and getting more skilled. And then I can play some people in Oxford and I can carry that on. And I don't have to have 2 separate campaigns. It could just be like an ongoing campaign. Like, they even said it could last for years if you really want it to, or it could last for a weekend, an event. And the fact that there's going to be some generic rules is good, but then the fact that there's going to be codex specific stuff gets really interesting. Like, they teased, if your Space Marine captain gets too injured, he can get interred into a dreadnought. I think that is like just a cool concept. It's a great idea. Give you ideas for converting your models. Like, it'd be interesting to see how much it leans into sort of narrative missions and stuff, or like sort of weird, obscure things, or how much people could game it, or like go, oh yes, but I'm going to suddenly take all my guys with, super power armor or storm shields when they shouldn't normally. And I think it's that thing of, you've got to have a reasonable baseline of the assumption that everyone's going to play it in the spirit that it's meant to be played, and that you don't have that one competitive guy that's going to just try and break every single rule, or not even break it, but like bend the rules to the maximum advantage just to win a game, as opposed to telling a story with their army. Yeah. But ultimately, it just gives you loads of great options, I think. And as I said before, I imagine there's going to be hundreds of missions available for this edition, a bit like Age of Sigmar. So I reckon there'll just be a ton of more narrative missions, and it'll give you an option to like want to play it. Yeah. As opposed to just doing, because if there are just like, I doubt there will be just 6 match play missions. I think there'll be a ton of match play missions as well. But what I want to see is how they do Crusade. I think it's like one of the most exciting things about the edition. Like, this seems really cool. I really want to play it. Weirdly, I was like doing a kind of mini campaign, like slow growth thing in Oxford, that had all these custom missions and rules where you can level up units to be sort of veterans and gain special ability. So it's sort of like they've taken that as a concept and they've expanded it. So I imagine the local gaming club will be doing Crusade quite a bit, even if it's only for like a few months. I mean,
the thing that's really interesting to me about Crusade is, again, if this is something that's implemented within the 40k app, which again is something they kind of talked about, is the opportunity for them actually to create global events as well. So actually plug in at certain points and create campaign opportunities that are global events. And I mean, it would be really interesting as well if they started to include like achievements within the app and started to give you opportunities that you could log results that could lead towards, getting kind of little, like markers. Because it was funny during the lockdown, not that we're out of the lockdown yet, but you know what I mean, during the whole COVID lockdown situation, they did actually release a series of community achievements, like read a book and paint a unit and all the rest of it, and they had like just little images as a little bit of an incentive. But even though they wouldn't necessarily unlock stuff or the rest of it, or just have something on your profile that, you know, people could look at and go, oh, he's got this many achievements and so on and so forth. It could be an interesting thing. But I think global events and things like that become a lot easier to implement if you've got a comprehensive Crusade-style system where all of a sudden you can say, oh, well, we now want to, you know, do a Vigilus campaign, and we can actually now track players and track their input through their Crusades to see who would win in a you know, track the data to feed into a broader campaign narrative. So yeah, I don't know, that would be phenomenal. But Crusades in and of itself is really interesting because you know, you can be playing against anyone in any scenario and still feeding into your Crusade, as long as both players are obviously happy with the situation. Ultimately, I could be training for or practicing for a tournament, and Phil could come around and help me out do some tournament stuff, but he could be like, yeah, I know you're going to bring this tournament army, but I'm still going to run my Crusade army. That cool? And it's like, yeah, of course it is, mate. And it could still feed into what Phil's doing, even though my army maybe isn't really concerned with that situation. Yeah. Again, it's really cool.
I mean, it's sort of structuring the sorts of things I do in my head anyway. Like when I'm playing all my games, I'm sort of narratively in my head going, this is one army, it's playing all of these, they're linked, even if they're not linked in any kind of structure. And the thing that this is doing is everyone wants to play, or most people want to play narrative games, but they're like, oh, but how? Like, here's just like a basic set of rules to follow. I like the idea that maybe there's going to be some way to score it or log it in your app to keep track of it, which makes keeping track of your games a bit more exciting. So, yeah, I just think there's going to be so much potential with it. And I think as long as it can get balanced, so if you're like a really advanced army, you can still play a weaker army, and there's like via stratagems or CP or ways of balancing those out. That'll be interesting.
They did mention like a scaling system.
Yeah.
So, for instance, say you've played 20 games of this, and someone's like, "Oh, I'm getting into it. I'll join this Crusade thing with you." Like, they will be given additional points and stuff, so they can kind of match you,
like petty cash in Blood Bowl.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Very similar kind of philosophy. It's just very exciting, though, guys. I think, again, just another really great addition to things that's definitely going to spruce things up. So, fine. Okay, cool. So we've talked about the app. We've talked about Crusade. We've talked about the models. We've talked about varying different things that have occurred. So let's just wrap this up now by talking about the 9 things. And we're going to try and keep it as quick and concise as possible. And some of these things we've already addressed as we're going through. So the first of the 9 things is polish. So every new update brings more polish, and this one is the same. So yeah, we're just going to continue down the polish. So it's going to be the best version of Warhammer 40,000 ever, according to Games Workshop. I mean, are you convinced, Phil?
Yeah, I mean, I think 8th is a really solid rule set. I'm glad they're not kind of going out their way to completely change it, like doing alternate actions and stuff like that. I think they're just refining it, which is good. Like, I think this is basically what 7th edition was for 6th edition. Hopefully it'll just get better. I don't think they need to completely rewrite things. They mentioned in the Q&A like they're going to tweak morale, so that'll be really interesting to see how that plays. And the other thing is that there was always like loads of sort of rules and sort of weird things like, you know, CP farming and allies and soup, and how terrain wasn't ever very good. And we were always like, why have they not ever put any of these into the beta rules? And it just feels like
you've started rambling through the varying points we're about to get to, mate. There's other points within the 9.
I guess, but my point was, it's like they clearly saved all of these ideas rather than put them into the beta rules for us to play and for the game to evolve gradually. They've gone, these are cool ideas, let's save them for the next edition.
Oh, totally. Totally. Joe, will this be the best version of 40k ever?
Well, they kind of have to say that, otherwise it'd be pointless them saying this is the most mediocre version of the game ever, but we're releasing it for the sake of it.
I think they should say, "Do you remember Fifth, Dan? Do you remember Fifth? The glory." Yeah. It's not that, but it comes close. Would you? I want
to see James Workman be like, hold up the 5th edition rulebook and be like, "Dan, this is for you," and then laughs and snaps it in half and sets it on fire.
I mean, to be fair, he'd have incredible physical strength to snap that codex in half. I suppose if you got...
The man's
he can do whatever he wants. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you could get one of the old paperback mini rulebooks, I guess. I mean, he could probably snap that in half.
Yeah, I like 8th edition. I liked it more in the beginning because I won more games. But I think it's.
I liked it in the middle for the same reason, Joe.
But I think if they can not reset the clock, but basically reduce the amount of books I have to carry around, make it a bit more streamlined, get rid of some ambiguity, it's all good.
Well, the books now are just going to become one app, right? That literally becomes it, which is a massive...
Well, the thing is, everyone likes physical books to carry around.
Not in tournaments, they don't, mate.
Right. What I like about this app is that if you, for instance, bought Faith and Fury, the Imperial Fists supplement, and the Space Marine Codex, you then made a Space Marine Imperial Fist army with all the new stuff in it from Faith and Fury. Then, with your army list, you can click on the unit, much like Battlescribe, and it automatically shows you what its stats are, what it has access to, and what stratagems are available to it. And then you don't have to open loads and loads of different pages in different books because it's all at one click in your army list.
Yeah. I am well in favour of that, assuming they actually do it, but we will see. All right, anyway, look. Point number 1, is this going to be the best version of 40k ever? Possibly. I've made it very clear on multiple occasions the things I don't like about 8th edition.
We don't need to go into them now.
We don't need to go into them now. But if 9th edition sorts out some of those issues, I'll get some way towards thinking it's better. But it seems like they're still going to have the same combat system, which means it's still going to be a bit bonk. Bring back initiative is all I can say. Point number 2 is join the Crusade, and they talk about the Crusade system. We just spoke about the Crusade system, so we'll move on to start with more command points. So everyone now is getting the same amount of command points dependent upon the size of the game, unless, of course, they're taking Guilliman or Marnius Calgar or Abaddon the Despoiler that gives them bonus CPs. Everyone is getting the same amount of CPs in a game of varying sizes. The only thing is, at the moment, is we don't know how many CPs you're getting for the size of game. I would say it's reasonable to assert that you're going to get 1 command point per 100 points, but that would be purely speculative on my part. And 20 CPs in a 2,000 point game is quite high. So
that's far too high.
Exactly, but that's high based on the current situation.
That's true.
If all of a sudden it's costing you 3 CP to take an ally, it gets more interesting. Yeah. I mean, Joe, what's your vibe on CPs? How many CPs would be enough, you feel?
I reckon it's going to be somewhere between, for 2,000 points, it's going to be somewhere between 12 and 15.
Oh.
Because that's what you get if you take a brigade.
Boosh.
And that's like your biggest detachment.
But they did say you're all going to get more, so maybe they'll start at the 15.
The thing is, though, you got to think, say you added second detachment, that costs you a CP, and then you take it from another codex, that costs you another CP. So say you start at 12, you're down to 10. Then you take an additional relic, an additional warlord trait, you're down to 8. And that's basically the same as what you have now, kind of thing. And 8 is a good level, because I think if you start the game and you've got 15 command points to spend throughout the game, you're probably going to finish the game with command points left over, unless you're running someone like Blood Angels, who literally just demolishes CP in 2 turns.
I mean, my tournament Elder army that I was running only had 6 CP, and I hardly ever had a reason to spend those. So this is great for me if I can continue to run that force.
Yeah, I they have to draw a very fine line between having too many and not enough. And I think if you've got too many, then CPs kind of cease to become important because then you can just do whatever you want. You need to you need to be able to make that decision of, do I take 3 codexes in 3 detachments and have no CP throughout the game, or do I have 1 detachment from 1 codex, but I've got CP to spend during the game to outflank, do a couple re-rolls, and maybe like, do additional psychic power or Vect or whatever.
I mean, that's the crazy one, though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's that one. Is you could, and again, we don't know. They might not FAQ Vect up to 4 CP for 9th edition. They might keep it at 3.
Yeah, because you want to think, you want resource management, because it stops being resource management when you can just do whatever you want.
But I think that's what they want as much as anything.
12 to 15 is a sweet spot because you have to think about it then.
I mean, Phil, you play the Guard, and as a result, you have a lot of troops in your army. What's your feeling on the fact that, in some respects, these changes to the stipulations may result in troops not being such a factor anymore? I mean, you worried about the loss of the troop?
Well, no, because it sounds like you're still going to need troops for objectives secured, unless there's another way of getting objectives secured via different detachments. But
indeed,
they've not said.
Using a super elite killie army and destroying everything. That's how you deal with that situation.
Yeah, but I mean, weirdly, I recent games or recent-ish games when I was doing Guard with my Inquisition, with my Assassins, on average, I would have maybe 5 or 6 CP. I'd have barely any because I had to spend it all to get the Assassin and get the Inquisition in there, or to give myself some relics. So more CP is good if you're a proper Guard army where you're doing like a double brigade or double battalion or battalion plus a brigade or some kind of nonsense like that. Then you've got 20 plus CP. Then you're probably gonna be like, oh no, I've gone down from 20 plus to 12 or 15. You might be a bit frustrated, but then that's, I don't know, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think what the real interesting thing will be what kind of more pre-game CP stratagems they're going to be, because it sounds like there are going to be some, and what kind of universal stratagems there's going to be, because it sounds like there's some to do with close combat or falling back out of close combat. So yeah, it'd be great to, because I think the universal stuff's always been good, and it'd be great to see more. So yeah, it'd be cool to see what they do with that.
Indeed. And I suppose now more than ever, though, Phil, you can start to field an army of nothing but tanks, because the tanks now have had a big old buff, haven't they, from point number 4, where they're now going to be able to keep on shooting.
Yeah, this is good. So they can. What's interesting is I think they said they can shoot in combat. They didn't say they can fall back and shoot. So it'll be interesting to see. I
mean, it's reasonable to assume that they should be able to fall back and shoot as well as shoot in combat, though, right?
Yes, yeah. I mean, one would hope, but who is it?
I think the ability to fall back and shoot is going to become a stratagem.
Ooh.
Well, I said I'd be happy with that.
Because tanks are terrible in combat, so being able to shoot in combat is like their combat, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't think you'll be able to benefit from like command abilities and stuff, or like supporting characters whilst you're in combat because you're too busy trying to stay alive. You'll still be able to shoot and be somewhat effective.
Wouldn't it be nice as well that, like, for like armies like the Guard, if they had an opportunity, because again, it depends how they rule it, right? Because obviously you can shoot in combat, but does that mean you can shoot the units you're in combat with?
I think it will be locked to, you can only shoot at the unit that you're in combat with, or models that are within an inch.
Because really?
Some armies already have stratagems that allow you to shoot into combat.
Yeah.
So you want to kind of still make those abilities unique.
But then I suppose that becomes. Sorry, Phil.
I was going to say the Guard super heavy tanks all have a rule already where the sponson weapons can shoot. Well, the tank can just shoot in combat when it's in combat, but the sponson weapons, so things like predominantly heavy bolters, heavy flames, have to shoot the thing that it's within an inch of, and the big gun has to shoot something else, which makes sense. So, but whether they clarify that in terms of like your battle cannon on your Lehman Russ has to shoot a different target from the thing you're in close combat with, narratively makes sense, but whether that's too much nuance that they won't easily be able to write that in as a universal rule. Because you've got to remember, they might FAQ a load of data sheets, but I think they're going to try and avoid that as much as possible. So they're going to try and make things universal rules where possible.
I mean, one of the things they clarified in the FAQ on Tuesday was that they're going to have a comprehensive FAQ segment within the rulebook as well. So the idea is the core rulebook is still a very succinct, tight rule set, but the idea is that they're now actually going to expand, much like how they used to do in older editions, where the rules were kind of intermixed with examples and things. All the examples are going to exist in a kind of an appendix section. So that's going to be interesting. So it's likely they'll word it in a certain type of way, but you'll get by all accounts, you're going to get a comprehensive insight into exactly how they intend that to work, because they've gone quite heavy on the FAQ stuff. Because as is evident with 8th edition, it's much nicer to just go through all of that in the rulebook than it is to constantly release documents after the fact clarifying silly points. So I think they're going to try their absolute best to address all these sorts of variables. It's also worth highlighting as well that they also confirmed that these rules will not just affect tanks, but they'll also be available to monsters as well. So monsters will still benefit from the ability to be able to shoot while in combat as well, which is a big, plus for them, to say the very least.
I think that'd be quite good, because if you think look at the Tyrannid big bugs, the Tyrannofex with the 2d6 heavy flamer, and if it doesn't move, it gets to shoot twice.
That'd be nasty.
That'll be all sorts of fun.
4d6 heavy flamer in combat. You're all dead.
Yeah, exactly. And here's a funny one. We've turned it into a blast weapon as well. Not that blast weapons are the next point on this list, but we'll get to them in a moment. And we assume you probably know what I mean when I say that by now. But let's see what happens. So tanks, that's a thing. They've reworked terrain. We talked about this earlier in this segment where we were talking about the reworks of terrain and how it compared to ITC situations. They've really looked at terrain and tried to address it as a proper feature within the game. So terrain has been reworked, and I think that's important. And as they clarified in the FAQ as well, they're really seeking to kind of remove some of the more gamey aspects of it. So no longer can you stand up on a crate, apparently, and not get punched in the face by an Imperial Knight. That was their words, which is frustrating, because that's a strategy I used to great effect on many occasions. But apparently that's being taken away from me. So that's going to be an interesting one.
I think it will be good. I like the fact that they were saying it's not... Terrain just isn't about cover now, so there's going to be other elements to it beyond cover saves. But they also did sort of hint that there's going to be different levels of cover saves, so a bit like in the narrative aspect of the 8th edition book. I think you've got hard cover and soft cover, so like a +1 save, +2 save. So that'd be interesting.
I think one of the things that was always interesting with the way cover worked is not so much the way cover worked as cover saves and other things. I think there are some inherent issues with 8th edition and how things interacted with terrain and how it created these interesting nuances. I've said it on many occasions that one of the fundamental problems with certain aspects of 8th edition as a rule set was that it was very good for tanks, infantry, and tanks and infantry basically. But as soon as you added in cavalry, large titanic things, flyers, the game got very, very cumbersome very quickly, because they hadn't actually done enough work to address how an Imperial Knight interacts with a ruin how a how a cavalry unit interacts with a ruin, so on and so forth. And I think that's something that they've seemingly addressed here, which is fantastic, because that's one of the fundamental issues with 40k at the moment is they've got these gigantic models and these fantastic flyers, and they've got all this cool stuff that they've got, but they've never really fleshed out how these things interact with the setting, and sort of address that is definitely good.
What I don't want to see, though, is where... Because a lot of the terrain has special rules now, and half the time we just ignore them. Like, when we're at Warhammer World and there's a bastion, no one plays as a bastion. Everyone's like, oh, it's just line of sight blocking terrain.
Yeah.
And do you remember the old rules of mysterious terrain, where you have to roll off for everything and put a dice to symbolise what it was? Half the time you'd just be like, just ignore that. And every piece of terrain in AOS has a special rule. So if it's like that, it might be good, but sometimes you might just be like, it's just too frustrating to keep track of all of that. So how they get around that will be interesting to see.
The only rule that I've ever been picked up on is only when it ever affects my opponent is it's -2 to charge through craters or trees.
I love that one.
But it always props up. Like you'll be like turn 4. It's already happened loads, but like their unit's about to die. So, oh yeah, it's -2. And like, hang on.
Yeah.
We've not done any terrain rules.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I'm -2 on this one.
Yeah.
One rule that's always really annoyed me, right, is you can shoot through 4 buildings worth of windows, doors, hanging, like, guttering between a knight's legs and hit a unit. But because it stood in the open and not stood in one of those buildings, it doesn't get a cover save.
Yeah.
But you've threaded the needle through like these tiny little holes to hit the target. And like that unit could be obscured, and you can literally only see a Chaos Space Marine's backpack spike. But he gets no benefit whatsoever. And you still hit him at full ballistic skill and full damage kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like that's all going to change, which is good.
It should just become like you're always in cover if you're obscured.
I think, again, it made sense within the current 8th edition rule set because of the fact they were trying to simplify that whole interaction. Do you get a cover save if you're in the open? No. Do you get a cover save when you're in cover? Yes. I mean, it's as straightforward as it needed to be. But I agree with you. Coming from the old editions, where there was a certain degree of nuance to whether you did or didn't, I think that was important. Although, again, I think the old editions massively struggled with the fact that there were so many random debates about whether or not certain things were obscured enough. And, it just started getting into very opinion-driven things. And I think that's one of the things that 8th edition has done well, is introducing rules that get rid of some of the ambiguity. So we've gotten rid of blast templates because there were so many conversations being had back in the day on whether something was in or out of the template. The other thing with templates as well was the weird way the scatter dice interacted with them, because you'd see someone roll the scatter dice, and the scatter dice would clearly, at least based on your perspective on the things, be pointing aggressively to the left, and then the blast template would sort of move a little to the left, but also quite conveniently sort of magnetized towards the thing that it wanted to hit. So it was always one of those weird conundrums that they've got rid of with varying things, which is great to see. Another thing that was super interesting in the 9 new things was size of game. So they have essentially kicked things off by saying, kill team's gone away now. We don't...
Well, no, they haven't.
Oh, have they not?
Still there. They said kill team's a thing.
Kill team is still a thing.
Yeah.
But you can now play smaller games within new 40k.
Yeah.
So they're having their cake and eating it too, is what you're saying.
Well, no, because I think kill team is literally like one squad versus one squad. This, I think, will be... They in the Q&A said 500 to 2,000 points. Now, is that going to be the smallest amount you can play? Probably, but it obviously scales up beyond 2,000 points. But I think they'd probably do... Because they listed off a bunch of names for the different sizes. They've all got specific names. I imagine it's something like 500, 7 or 850, 1,000, 1,250, 500, 2,000, something like that.
Okay.
And all the missions are tailored all have different rules or whatever to the different sizes that you're playing on.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like you might have one mission, but they're saying, for example, here's the map layout for a 500-point game. Here's the map layout for a 2,000-point game. Or maybe it's you have a bunch of different missions specifically tailored for those sizes, which might make more sense.
Intriguing. All right, well, that's good that we're still keeping Kill Team at least. I mean, obviously, Kill Team never really went away because you could carry on playing it regardless, although whether they support the game system with new rules for the new miniatures that get released, I guess we'll wait and see. But, yeah, all right, cool. Well, that's something. Joe, did you have any thoughts on the size of games, or is it just a relatively unimpressive element?
I like the idea of being able to do Combat Patrol again. I always enjoyed Combat Patrol, or 40k in 40 minutes, as I used to know it as, like
Indeed.
400 points kind of thing. And I really enjoyed playing that because you could get 5 or 6 games done in an evening, and you could have a lot more fun and play more fun and fluffy kind of thematic lists. And it was always exciting because then a character in that army could really be a hero kind of thing. I really liked that one. It's weird, like, to think that, like, they're making a big deal, like, oh, you could play a 1,500-point game. That used to be the norm. Now that's an exciting prospect.
Exactly,
which I find really weird. And it'll probably be interesting to be like, oh, I've just started a new army. I've only got about 1,000 points. But GW have actually thought about that and have created some rules for me to play my army at that size. So that'd be.
And they even said that Crusade, is best starting off at a sort of 500-point level, because it is almost meant to be like a start a new army, build it up as you go along.
Is Crusade just Path to Glory with a different name?
I think so. But also a tracking
I think
system.
more advanced, but similar as a concept, because I think Path to Glory is very much you're doing a league with a specific number of friends.
Yeah, I think Path to Glory is that you rolled a dice and then you get to see what unit you get to put in your army next.
Yeah,
it's a bit more linear and controlled, and actually forces you to buy specific units for that army. Well, I suppose Crusade just allows you to add whatever you want.
That seems to be the general thrust of the situation, yeah. The next of these points was be strategic with your reserves, which is basically what we talked about earlier, where they've added pre-game stratagems where you can muck around with your army and add a more strategic layer to things where you're having stuff go into reserves or gaining access to different resources or extra kind of abilities. The implication being that they wanted to make the game feel more like you're a commander of an army and you're offering like different strategic benefits and getting a little bit more tactical, which is no bad thing. I mean, again, new tactical depth to the game is always going to be interesting, but equally I think it's going to create a very interesting approach to certain things, because again it sort of speaks to the skirmish aspects to the game, but then can add a lot of other kind of random elements. But I suppose that really kind of adds to some of the technical nuances of things and makes things quite interesting.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, one other thing that it might be doing is to eliminate Alpha Strike armies.
Ooh.
So before you could only deep strike, hold stuff in reserve if it could teleport or come from the sky or whatever. Now you could be like, oh, my really generic troops unit that has no ability of outflanking, or my tank, for example, my tank commander that I want that always gets blown up turn 1, I can now hide him turn 1 off the board and then just bring him back on. And I think hopefully that's the level of nuance within that stratagem that you can be able to do. And I get a feeling that that's half of what it's meant to do, not just about outflanking stuff.
Indeed. Although I look at it and just think, cool, I can now get my aggressors where I want them to be early doors. Yay!
The stratagem to stop Centurions getting all over the FAQ to stop Centurions getting all over the place is kind of being taken back again.
Yeah.
Well, it'll be interesting to see if there's any caveats to this ability, like, because they might go, no, you can't do it for Centurions, or certain big things, like they might be like monsters, no, they can't do it.
They'll get around to, making those stipulations for the Tyranids and who else don't they like? The Tyranids. I mean, obviously they've got new Necrons now, so they'll not do it to them, but maybe Death Guard, because they're so last year, they'll be like, and Death Guard can't do it anymore, because, whatever. But no, they won't do it to the Marines. All the Marine stuff will be able to do it, because, Marines, it's fine. It'll be fine. Have a Blast was the next bit, which is not the return of Blast templates, but the return of the Blast weapon profile, which is essentially a new type of weapon profile, which will be updated to replace varying weapons, so whirlwinds, mortars, battle cannons, these kind of weapons that clearly fire massive blasts will now have very specific rules for them. The broad consensus being that if you're shooting at a big unit, as in a unit of some amount of models, they haven't confirmed exactly how many models yet.
I think it's going to be 20.
You think 20?
I think it's going to be 20 models, because when you get to 20 models with specific units, they then get benefits. So Plague Bearers, Orc Boys, Gene Stealers, and there's some other stuff that once you get to a unit of 20, they then either get +1 to hit or -1 to hit, or just stuff like that. Because if you think like a Chaos Knight with double battle cannon will then get 24 shots at that unit. That will just be like that. If it was 10, it would just nuke that unit immediately with no chance.
I'm going to guess that it's actually 11 plus, because if you look at the new Knight stratagem that they previewed, one of them specifically works against a unit of 11 plus.
Ooh.
And everything's a 10-man unit is easy to do. 11 plus is a bit harder, and if it's 11 plus, it tends to have the ability to be 20 plus. So I think that could be the level that they're going to choose it at. And if you think about a battle cannon, regular battle cannon, so on the Lehman Russ, that is 1d6, and then you can shoot twice. That's 2d6. That's 12 shots. So 12 shots on an 11-man unit is pretty decent, because you're not going to kill 11.
What, if you're Pask, though? Then you're hitting on 2s. Ooh, re-rolling 1s because you're a commander. That'll be...
Well, exactly. Yeah. I think there will be still probably, you'll be lucky if you kill 11, but if you do, great.
I just don't think it makes the guns worth it in comparison to anti-horde guns that already exist. Because, having a battle cannon shoot 12 times is cool.
Yeah.
But the moment that unit drops... So say you've got 3 battle cannons in your army with Lehman Russes. The first one shoots their big squad, kills enough to drop it down low enough that it's no longer giving a bonus to the rest of your guns.
Yeah, but you've still got the multiple D6 shots, which is still pretty reasonable. And the fact that you get that...
Like a case of, I'd rather just take 3 Lehman Russ Punishers and just always fire 20 shots.
I think all it's doing is making blast weapons a bit more useful when you've got no better targets. Because a lot of those blast weapons, like, for example, the battle cannon isn't meant to be used for killing hordes. I mean, you would in older editions, but now it's like use it for taking out other tanks. But if you're up against an army that has no tanks, you're rolling 1 or 2 d6s for your number of shots. So it's just trying to help balance it out where it's got a bit more usefulness, whereas it's not meant to be a replacement for your Punishers and stuff. And in fact, I think they've got the sweet spot, because if it was so good, you would be like, why would I ever take a Punisher cannon again? Then they've done it wrong, basically.
I think, though, where this rule really comes into effect is with the blast weapons that are going to be very kind of reliable at clearing like the hordes and throwing in like lots of shots, but at lower strengths. So back in the day, I always used to have this statement that in older versions of the Guard Codex, the Astra Militarum Codex, I always used to rate the Griffin, because the Griffin had loads of shots but wasn't very powerful. And in place of that, I think the Wyvern or the Wyvern is going to see some really amazing buffs, because you can take a free tank unit of Wyverns, and then to Joe's point where you go, oh, my first unit's going to shoot at it and then the next one's not going to be that impressive. If you fire a free-man unit of Wyverns at a Horde unit of, say, Gaunts, you're going to just mess them up, because all of a sudden you're going to go, well, a Wyvern's got 4d6 shots, so if I fire 4d6 shots at you with the whole unit, well, all of a sudden that's 24 shots per guy, so I'm going to be rocking, what is that, 72 shots?
So to slightly poo-poo your argument, vehicles are individual units once they get deployed.
Oh, even the Wyverns?
Yeah, because it's a vehicle. Okay. It's the same with leaving. But even so, like the fact that like that and the quad launcher does 4d6 shots, like you're doing your max amount of shots is actually really good. So it makes those should be Horde killers even better.
But like, say for instance, it's 11 plus models. Like, are we just going to see everyone running squads of 10, and you'll never see hordes?
Well, you're not going to run 10-man squads of Horde units, because the reason that they're good is because they're Hordes.
And you give them, like, psychic powers to buff them.
Yeah.
So you do, like, your Plague Bearers are going to still be good, but you'll have to take that mild hit of slightly more optimal things shooting at them.
30 cultists was amazing early doors in 8th edition. 3 10-man units of cultists were awful. That was the situation, right? And it's inherent within the way that the 8th edition rule set worked, that big units were just inherently stronger. And again, another thing that's really interesting for like the Horde thing is will one unit still be able to control 2 objectives, 3 objectives? You know,
I hope not.
Again, because that is going to be an interesting thing. I mean, don't get me wrong, they needed to address Horde, but then I'm worried that we end up in a situation where they make Hordes so useless that a lot of armies that were relying on those kind of mechanics, like Orcs, Tyranids, Nurgle, all of a sudden become totally useless because Games Workshop wanted to make Custodes and Knights better.
Can I tell you a fun story on the old Krieg Facebook group? So after this came out, I was obviously, oh my god, my guard army's amazing, my tanks are so much better. There were literally people on Facebook complaining like, oh, the Krieg army's now useless because troops and infantry aren't as good anymore. And I'm like, but we don't have Horde armies, like it doesn't really affect us, like in a negative way. But some people are just seeing like the negative in it anyway. So there was a bit of a weird overreaction of internet rage going on.
That's how it goes when you're a Krieg player, though, man. The world's out to get you.
Well, exactly. You're used to all these hard knocks.
Well, you're clearly not, because you moan about them every 5 minutes as a group, not you specifically.
but I think even as a Horde player, what you don't want is that Hordes aren't viable, but what you want them to be is not as dominating in the game as you sometimes see them. Or that like massive one blob that is just literally like that's your one tactic. I've got my Plague Bearers and I'm just charging forwards and that's it. Yeah. You want to be able to deal with them so you get a fun and balanced game basically.
I still think though, going back around to the way army lists are built and talking through all this madness, I still think they need to do some work on the aggressors to make them make sense within this rule set. Because every time I talk about everything, I still go, so yeah, what happens when you take 3 squads of 6 aggressors? Like, those things are just so efficient in all situations. And
if you're Ultramarines.
I mean, like, aggressor spam is, I think, I don't know, they're just so good, man. And especially now that you can, tactically maneuver them around and you don't have to take any scouts or troops, so you've got more points to play with.
I think you'll find they just get more expensive.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Like, I think they will... yeah, hopefully they do points balancing. Like, they've not talked about chapter approved yet.
Well, I think all the points will be
Updated in the new
updated.
edition.
Yeah, I think chapter approval might even just come out with it.
Well, that's how. Yeah, it's weird because that's like a summertime release normally for Age of Sigmar. So, but then maybe they release them both at sort of around the same time rather than Christmas, because Christmas always feels a bit like at the end of the year.
I mean, that's because it is.
Well, no, I mean, yeah, you know what I mean.
The last of the 9 things, staying on point, is Freedom of the Skies, which is funny because it's illustrated by a Chaos Space Marine of Khorne persuasion wielding a Helldrake, which the more observant players will know isn't actually a flyer in the sense of what they're talking about. But whatever, it's fine. It's just it's just a vehicle that has the fly keyword. It is not a supersonic vehicle.
Well, it might be that those things get a bit better because they gain some more of those sort of flyery rules.
Maybe
go off the board and come back.
But again, I just thought it was a funny illustration that the way they describe Freedom of the Skies is the unit that won't benefit from it.
Yeah, for sure.
At least not initially, until they get around to doing another half-baked Chaos Space Marine Codex in the future. But anyway, look, flyers in 40k, as an Elder player, I more than understand the frustration and the nuances that they've created throughout the years. And by the sounds of things, they're going to be more fun to play and more fun for people to play against. And I'm 100% in favour of that. I have asserted that for a long time, the Elder flyer specifically is a very, very overpowered unit. And, you know, even though that is the case, that didn't obviously stop me from using it. If anything, it encouraged me to use it. But it's good to hear that they're making those adjustments, because ultimately I'm never going to complain when they make balance changes to things that I already knew were busted, but I was happy to exploit it while it was good. But it's nice to know now that things are changing on that front. Hopefully it'll still be viable to run free flyers, because, you know, I've got the models and I'd like to continue using them. But we'll see what happens, right? I mean, again, who knows what's around the corner on that front. But
yeah, I mean, you could assume that the detachments are going to be the same, but they might, for example, take the flyer option out of the detachments and have it as solely as the fly air wing detachment, which might then, you know, hamper you or limit your options for the amount that you can take. Who knows?
But they're changing it now so that your flyer can actually you can't get snookered, and then whereas now you can actually fly off the table and come back on again, which then makes some specific flyers actually viable. So something like the Void Raven bomber, the Orc bombers are going to be hilarious now, and the Death Watch plane, which drops bombs as well.
Yeah. What about the Tau plane that drops bombs? The Barracuda or whatever it's called.
I imagine that would be worthwhile as well, because if you can just fly over units, just repeatedly bombing stuff, it would be hilarious. Because you could be like, aha, just fly over someone, kill someone, fly off the table, next turn, position yourself in a decent place to shoot something, and then turn 3, fly over something and off the board again.
I suppose it depends on sequencing in terms of how they communicate that stuff, because there was a period of time where there was vector striking, so you'd move over something and then you had to place the miniature, because like there was a weird nuance with vector strike that you resolved the hits based on where the model ended. So you couldn't perform a vector strike while leaving the battlefield because your model wasn't in the battlefield anymore, and as a result wasn't there to resolve the vector strike, which I always thought was an interesting nuance. I can imagine they won't fall foul of that kind of nonsense again. But yeah, I mean, it's super interesting, man. I think, again, there's a lot of interesting elements to all of this. The thing, as I say, the things that are interesting that I haven't quite talked about yet are things like, can one unit hold multiple objectives? What actually are they going to do with morale beyond what they've kind of teased? Are there going to be any drastic changes to combat, if any? And why is it that they've put a Stormcast Eternal in the Space Marine range in the form of the Executioner man? Who looks exactly... he looks like a Stormcast Eternal has gone over to Space Marines. I mean...
His armour's very stylized, like the chaplain. So I think they've gone for something of that kind of holy order sort of aspect. But who knows what it's actually going to be with its weird square sword.
Yeah,
I mean,
and his Necron helmet.
I mean, it's interesting in as much as it looks like, it looks like a very good opportunity for people to convert it into an Emperor's Champion. That was my first thought on it. I was like, oh, that'll make a good Emperor's Champion. But even like his legs and stuff, he looks like the Lord Relector or whatever it was called from Age of Sigmar.
That new banner looks exactly like the one from the first Age of Sigmar box set.
Yeah, the Lord Relector guy, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's also similar in sort of how over the top it is to the Sisters of Battle sort of standard bearer. It's weird that whole range of models is very Black Templars. It's very over the top and ornate and covered in icons and stuff. And the one thing I actually really like about the Primaris range is that they, like the generic Intercessor sort of Mark armor, is that they don't have that. They're very kind of clean and basic, which allows you to customize them to be whatever you want. It's like, for me, it's like, actually, I'd want to take the tabards off because my models don't have tabards. They've got different types of things hanging off the belt. And it's like, so actually I'd have to do a lot of effort to convert them up to look how I'd want them. They're almost like a bit too, they're great if you're a Black Templars player or like, Deathwatch or, no, maybe not Deathwatch, sorry, Deathwing, that sort of vibe, Dark Angels. But if you want something a bit more clean and minimal, they're a bit annoying because they're sort of too far in the opposite direction.
Yeah, they will, like for my White Scars, like I probably won't use those models at all, and like, I might use the base model, and I'll use the Assault Marine guys and the bikes. The rest of the stuff I'll have to convert heavily to make them look White Scarsy to kind of fit the aesthetic.
Same here.
It's interesting that they followed a very similar pattern to the Stormcast though as well, right? Because first, early doors with the Stormcasts, we had the Liberators, which were like the plain, generic Stormcast Eternal guys, and they were accompanied by the dudes with bigger hammers. I can't remember what they were called, but there was like the whole generic range. And then they went, oh, look, here's the Vanguard Hunter range, which was all lighter armor and skirmishy. And obviously
Phobos-esque.
Yeah, very Phobos-esque. And then in the latest version, they went, and here's a bunch of them with robes and stuff. And that's obviously where
they've done the wizard version. So by that logic, the next one will be the librarian army.
Well, potentially, but I mean, equally, like there was a lot of roby dudes. I can't remember what they called them. The new unit that everyone just assumes is Liberators in robes, but they actually have their own name.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, I mean, it's interesting, right? I mean, ultimately, I obviously understand that there's going to be loads and loads of more Space Marine releases between now and the end of the end of existence. But at the same time, it's one of those that I do kind of hope now that they do kind of cool off after this, because I think we do need some time to let the Space Marine army kind of mature a bit and linger. And I think there's a lot of other races and factions that definitely need a lot more focus. It's important to do Space Marines when you launch an edition, but I think we just need to cool down right now. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, we're in a situation where they are about to release a load of new Space Marine miniatures when they haven't even finished releasing all the Space Marine miniatures from the Vanguard release that came out beforehand. I'm speaking about the Suppressors. It's like, where's their multi-part plastic kit gone? It's like...
think that'll come out over the next few months. I would have thought. But they've always sort of said like the Mark 10 armor there's 3 types. There's the standard, there's the Phobos, and there's the Gravis. And it's like this is the final one in theory, and it should be. That's enough to sort of round out the army to sort of not have to rely on firstborn old school Marines to sort of have all those tactical options. So hopefully once this is done, you should have tons of options to do a Primaris only army, in which case they could then be like, right, cool, they're done for 6 to 10 months, and maybe we introduce 1 or 2 units, but there'd just be the odd 1 or 2 as opposed to here's a brand new range. Although they might just do the whole Age of Sigmar style where there's a new chamber opening up every year. Yeah. And there's a brand new set of Mark 10 armor.
Yeah. But I may be the only person saying this potentially, although I think you guys support me in this statement. I'd like to see more people that look like the dudes with swords and shields and the Primaris Rude chainswords, and less Judicars. I just can't get on board with that miniature. He looks terrible.
Yeah. The chaplain guy looks amazing though. He's a really cool
model.
He
looks amazing.
And sort of the bonus that we haven't talked about is when they announced the Warhammer 40,000 website, there's a couple of other ones on there. So there was a captain who had a storm shield and a Volkite blaster or a Volkite pistol, which is pretty interesting.
Really interesting. But I dare say something that we need to talk about at another time, because it's now approaching the end of hour 3 of our conversation about 9th edition, and it seems like that is the best time to draw a conclusion to this chat. Hopefully you found it interesting. Hopefully it offered a different perspective. We did obviously talk about the rules and talk about our expectations and other things, but hopefully some of the broader chats that we got into were a little bit thought-provoking and a little bit different for you guys who have obviously probably at this point had quite a lot of insight on 9th edition from a lot of different, possibly more informed outlets. But nonetheless, thanks very much, guys. We're going to take ourselves away now to whatever it is that comes next. Transitional noise. Woo! And that's it, everybody. The end of the Lookout Sir 40k podcast. Potentially one of the few occasions where we've done a podcast with only one segment to it. But what a segment it was. 9th edition seems all very interesting and or exciting. And at the risk of saying more than we've only just said, I'm obviously quite excited about it. As is Phil, aren't you, Phil?
Yeah. No, I really am. I'm looking forward to everything that it has to offer. I'm sure there'll be bits that we don't like. There inevitably will be, even if that's, the app being a bit janky or codexes being too expensive or whatever. I'm sure there'll be something for us to complain about at a later date. But for now, it's all shiny and it's all lovely.
Well, that's what creates such quality content, right, Phil? I mean, in some respects, that's one of the shames of the Lookout Sir 40k podcast, is that we only began it at the point of 8th edition where most of the real horrific stuff had already been fixed. So all of those incredible rants that I would have shared with you over a phone call prior to recording them and putting on the internet were just wasted, Phil. Madness.
Because I was trying to think about it yesterday, like at what point did we start the podcast? And it was like obviously 2 years ago, and the the 8th edition is 3 years old, isn't it?
3 years old, yeah.
So we were a good year in. But weirdly, I think it was when the new edition came out, was probably around the time when we started to think about doing a podcast. Then we gave up waiting for Joe for a whole year. And then eventually he's weirdly committed to it by the time we did it.
Yeah. I mean, again, obviously, as is evident by the fact he's still not here in this outro segment, it tells you something about things. I mean, to be fair, he's got his new job that he just started with Foreground / Vanguard Studios. So he's in the mix with that.
He's busy being a face on the internet. No doubt.
He is being a face on the internet. But, again, obviously, if his face should bring people flocking to the Lookout Sir 40k podcast, it's all good news. Although I have noticed that he's not allowed to say he's ever done anything other than appear on Vanguard stuff. which I always find funny. Like, I was watching one of their videos the other day when he introduced Joe to his many fans, and he was like, it was really funny because the intro started with, you might remember this, or you might notice this guy's voice. And I was like, oh, he's going to plug the podcast. And then he said, yeah, because he appeared on one of our podcasts earlier. And I was like, oh, for God's sake. It's like, come on now. Come on.
Maybe all the Joe fans need to go over to wherever he now is and just occasionally mention it. Be like, I recognise this guy.
Oh, yeah, that's it.
Podcast. It's a reverse spam, I guess. Maybe.
I suppose so. No, they must stay here with us. They can't go anywhere else. I won't allow it.
They might like that one too much.
Exactly.
Come back.
And then we'll lose them. We'll lose them all. Although I like to think that we have a unique breed of fan, Phil. I think our type of content, I've said this before, our type of content and our style of delivery is never going to necessarily win over the hearts and minds of loads and loads of 40k fans. Like, we're not quite slick enough for a good chunk of the competitive scene, for example, or at least those who are aspirational to get into the competitive scene. And equally, we don't really kind of give the best kind of insight. I don't think we've ever once done a segment where we have attempted to describe how you win, for example.
No, but I mean,
I've talked about when I've won and how I did it, but I've never done a segment where it's like, this is how you win. And I feel like that's what the people like.
I don't know. I like to think that the people listening to the podcast are competent enough to know that already.
Well, that's what I go for. You see, I give our listeners probably more credit than others might. Or maybe they deserve themselves. Who knows?
No, that's true. I mean, a guy did reach out to me on Instagram today and was saying, "Oh, I'm really inspired to do a Krieg army because obviously that's what I've got, or one of my 2 armies now."
Yeah.
And he was like, "Oh, I really want to, I actually want to start playing the game. Like, where can I go and like learn and how to get into it?" And I basically said, "Just wait a month. Like, there's a new edition coming out. There'll be a ton of like how to play videos coming out." And it's like, yeah, you could learn 8th edition, but there's probably no point because 8th edition is literally a month away before it dies. Yeah. Do you think we should do a retrospective episode where we talk about the highs and lows of 8th edition?
100%, Phil. 100%. Saying goodbye to 8th edition would definitely be a worthwhile segment. I mean, the thing is as well, right? Here's the thing, right? You know how, like, honestly, if you want to get good at Warhammer 40,000, if you've listened to this for as long as you've listened to it for, and you're still thinking, but Dan, and also Phil, how do I actually get good at Warhammer 40,000? Here's the trick. Play it a lot. That's it. That's all it takes. Play it a lot against different people as much as you can. That's it. It's literally all it takes.
Normally it's best to play against people that are better than you and probably going to beat you.
Yeah.
But in doing so, you need to ask them what you did wrong and what you could improve. And if you have like a little 5-10 minute chat at the end of every game you play, you'll get infinitely better, even if you're not winning any of those games, because you'll just be learning the mistakes that you have made.
That's it. I mean, it's fair to say, Phil's ran a Krieg army for as long as I've known him, and he has refined his strategy quite spectacularly over the years. Like, I think Phil plays the Krieg very, very well. But obviously he struggles with the fact that his army isn't ever going to be necessarily as competitive, or at least not in 8th edition anyway, than other lists or even other Astra Militarum armies. But, you pull off wins against people that, you might look at from the outset and go, wow, how did he do that? And the answer is Phil just plays a lot of games and plays them against different people and has conversations about it and gets to a place where he understands the pros and cons of his army and how to deal with that. And you get there by reading your books a lot, thinking about it a fair bit, and playing it as much as you possibly can. And that's really all it is to it, right? And also, I suppose that's the other thing, right? Don't go into this as a player expecting to win all your games early doors as well, because that's just a road to nowhere. You've got to get comfortable with losing so as you can learn and get better. And, if you're on that win streak, again, a good example, is like when. So in the instances where I've gone the distance and won all games in a tournament, if Phil or Joe or anyone turns around to me midway through and goes, "How do you feel about the next game?" I think I always say, "Yeah, I'm gonna lose the next one." It's gonna, like, I'm always waiting to get caught out, I suppose, because I always expect the loss to come. And then when it doesn't, I'm like, "Oh, that's nice." But I always go into games prepared and happy to lose them, because ultimately, I just don't think. I don't know. Like, I heard people talking about. There's a thing that like Conor McGregor does from the UFC standpoint, and other people where they kind of they think about something or they will it into being, and it just sort of happens. So they approach situations going, "I've already won," or "I've already spent the money from this prize pool because I've already won it going into it." And obviously
that
there
kind
are
of confidence.
yeah, and obviously for some people that works, but I think in the case of 40k, I just think you're probably deluding yourself. Unfortunately, it's just a grind. It's like anything. You just got to practice it and practice it and practice it. If I wanted to get good at poker, I'd play a lot of poker. If I wanted to get good at Magic the Gathering, play a lot of Magic the Gathering and listen to a lot of podcasts. Same is true of 40k. So there you go. That's how you win 40k. Grind it out. There's no quick fix. It's years and years of hard graft and money. Have fun. I mean, Phil, you've been at it for years. How many tournaments have you won?
Well, none. But I don't ever go to a tournament thinking I've even got a chance of winning. But that's just because I'm a bit of a realist. But then maybe if I took like an army that was more competitive, like, and with some kind of net list that I then not just net listed and I'd actually practiced and honed it, then I'd probably do slightly better than playing an index army in an edition that was all about getting rid of indexes.
I mean, could you imagine, Phil, if this new Krieg book that is almost certainly about to happens, and it is the most powerful Astra Militarum army ever seen?
Oh, wouldn't that be nice?
I mean, those poor old Minotaurs would be shunned so hard. Like, no!
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, it's like, I sort of don't want to play. I like to sort of really focus on one thing at a time, and collecting and playing my Minotaurs is really good because I can sort of park my guard army. But if my guard army came out and it was really good, that's great. I could actually play with that while I'm still painting up my Minotaurs, and you know, then there's less pressure on getting my Minotaurs built and painted, sort of thing. Yeah, it'd be good if they are at least, you know, a little bump in. They don't need to be the best. If they were, that would be well worth the wait of having sat through 8th edition, having them not been that great. But they've not been terrible either. Like, I think there were ways to optimize them and sort of play them a bit better than that you otherwise would. I mean, I know there was a guy in America who won a tournament, and I think it was a Warhammer Citadel with Krieg. And I'm a bit like, how did he do that? But I think he had probably a more optimized list than mine, but also, you know, a different meta than what's going on in England. So maybe that helps as well. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, what is the number one thing you want your Krieg to get? If you could pick anything for them, what's the one thing they need more than anything, in your opinion?
Oh man, there's so many different.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot. We should have probably prepped this beforehand.
Okay, two things. I think all the Forge World units need like a power bump, or their rules to be more in line with the Games Workshop sort of stuff. So there's a whole bunch of like Forge World tanks that don't have grinding advance when they realistically should have the grinding advance rule. So really like simple stuff like that, or their number of shots haven't gone up in line with the number of shots that the Games Workshop stuff have. The other one is I'd love to see some unique stratagems for them that makes them play very different to a regular guard army, because that's the thing, is they're not meant to be a regular guard army. They're themed very different to be all about like siege and attrition, and you know, have lots of artillery, lots of tanks, lots of infantry sort of, but not necessarily have things like psychers and auxiliary units and stuff. So I'd almost like those stuff restricted back out like they used to be. So you can't take Ogrins, you can't take snipers and ratlings and stuff like that. But instead, you've got a power benefit elsewhere. Just to level them out.
It'd be cool as well if you, like, again, if they did something to give them a little bit more of a combat edge. If, for example, they turned around and said there's a stratagem to give them +1 to wound, maybe. That would be pretty mad, given the fact they've got lots of fighting training, or even just, +1 attack. Would be quite a nice step in the right direction. Really focusing in on that kind of thing, or I don't know, because you always envision the idea of the Krieg, because they're all very much about the kind of collective, aren't they? They're very much more of a kind of hive mentality almost than most other guard people, and that's obviously represented in their leadership ability, where they don't suffer morale from shooting. It's kind of like, I mean, again, have you ever heard about what happens to hornets when they go into bees' nests?
No.
Well, so the way bees deal with a hornet when a hornet enters a bee's nest is the bees smother the hornet and cook it. So basically, they raise their body temperature, and that kills the hornet. But in doing so, lots of bees are sacrificed to make that happen. So I kind of like the idea of Krieg get plugged into sort of mechanics that kind of represent that kind of mentality, where it's not about the individual, it's about the overall corpse, as it were. It's about the whole thing. So, like, I don't know, like the idea of, like, you could step over the bodies of Krieg that are falling in front of you, and they know to die in a certain type of way, so as you could walk over.
Like there's a Valhallan, I think, stratagem which allows you to shoot a unit in combat. So you can basically, you might potentially accidentally kill your own men as well, and you don't care. Something like that's cool. The ability to bring a unit back to life and come on as reserves would be good, because that's what they used to have in the old Forlorn Hope rule that was in Fall of Orpheus. So that kind of never-ending sort of tide or wave of infantry would be well represented that way. I mean, there's lots of unique ways of doing it. I think that, the sad thing was that the guy that originally did those rules died a few years ago now, and I just hope someone in Games Workshop has that much passion that he did to sort of do them justice.
I think they will do, right? Because I mean, obviously Pete Foley was saying how that's gone in-house into the GW actual rules writing team, and I think, I mean, they'd be crazy not to do them justice, right? Because, I mean, the Krieg is such a popular range. And I think the thing that's telling is the fact that the Krieg were the thing that they called out in the Q&A. Because, obviously, all you guys, your Krieg fanatics like you, Phil, have just bombarded them with Krieg. Tell me about Krieg.
Quite likely. Because they obviously could have name-checked, like, Elysians, but their model range doesn't exist, or the Renegade and Heretics, because their model range doesn't really exist either.
Or, like, Red Scorpions, or... Because you'd assume the Red Scorpions were popular, but...
Yeah, I've seen loads of people playing Red Scorpions at the moment. Like, I think they're pretty popular. Well, on one hand, it's like it would be great if they released some special mini supplements that catered for Red Scorpions and Minotaurs or other Forge World things. But at the same time, I'd almost like them not to, because at the moment I'm playing mine as White Scar successors and have the flexibility of giving them whatever sort of chapter trait I want. Whereas if Forge World came around and go, no, you get to, you get preferred enemy against Space Marines, which is what they used to have. But preferred enemy used to be, I think, reroll 1s to hit. And now it's reroll 1s to hit in close combat against that one thing. And it's like, oh god, that'd be so bad if that's what it is. So who knows? I'd like it to be something good if they are going to do it, rather than be like, oh no, I'm now trapped with these really crap rules. That would be my worry.
It was like the Blood Ravens, wasn't it? Because the Blood Ravens had really dodgy rules for about 3 months before the new Space Marine Codex dropped. which was a dark time for Blood Ravens players, where it was like, I used to run these guys as salamanders, and now, oh, goody goody. I can't even remember what the salamanders got. I think it was like +1 or +1 to their cover save or armor save when being shot by -1, I think is what it was.
No, I can't remember.
It was something really underwhelming at the time. But yeah, on the topic of time and underwhelming, that's it, guys. So, I mean, hopefully it wasn't underwhelming. Hopefully you enjoyed it thoroughly. Hopefully our version of, 9th edition, initial thoughts and coverage was entertaining to you. Obviously, let us know in the comments if there are comments, or reach out to us on social media if you can and would like to do that. Consider leaving us a review, and also why not follow us on our various social media platforms. I kind of did that bit twice, but we're going with that because I'm not very seasoned at doing the begging for attention bit, even though I know that I should, because even though I know you don't need reminding, it doesn't hurt to remind you every now and again. But anyway, there you go, guys. We hope you enjoyed the show. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.